the constitutional requirement for qualifying as a duly elected president of the country. Now, we're asking if you could please offer clarity so that we can have like a foundational ground of the debate. What do you have to do as a candidate to be constitutionally acknowledged as a duly elected president of the country?
No, there are all kinds of qualifications. Are you talking about the educational qualification or other kind of qualification?
Well, I mean, we're specifically referring to the constitutional mandate guiding election conduct and also the declaration of election winners.
No, you see, I have to. Except this question is just by the side. What I thought we were coming to do today is to look at the whole Nigeria that is upside down and then tell everybody what we think is the union or to save the people trapped in the
So I think Mr. Tony has the next.
If we go into the question of election and the event,
Mr. Tony, are you there? Can you still hear me? All right, Professor Pat, welcome. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right,
I can hear you.
All right. Welcome, sir. So just let me do like a brief introduction of both speakers while we wait for Mr. Tony to fix his network. So we have Mr. Tony here. He's Secretary General of NINAS. Now, NINAS stands for the Nigerian Indigenous Nationalities Alliance for Self-Determination. It is according to its website, it is the multi-ethnic alliance of the indigenous peoples of the Middle Belt, in brackets, part of the former Northern region, Ilano Omo Oodua, that is the former Western region, and the Lower Niger, that is the former Eastern and Midwestern regions. We also have Professor Pat Utomi, who is a professor of political economy and also a management expert. He's a fellow of the Institute of Management Consultants of Nigeria and a former presidential aspirant. He founded the Center for Values and Leadership and also the African Democratic Congress Party. So thank you both for joining us. So I think I'll just pass the first question to you, Mr. Tony Nnadi, because you already were answering the question. Now, the reason why we're starting off with the Constitution is because we believe that at the heart of this debate is the solution to Nigeria's problems, as you rightly identified. Now, we think that there is a divergent school of thought here. Some persons are of the opinion that engaging the Nigerian political system can bring about some of the desired changes that we want to the country. Others are saying that the Nigerian political system has to actually give way entirely and a new order has to replace it for there to be a solution to the problem. Now,
it has foundational flaws that cannot be rectified so that a new structure can be, put in place with a different architecture. So that's the side I'm on.
Okay, Mr. Tony, just as a follow-up question,
yes.
How do you envisage that this demolition can take place?
If anybody who has read, we have placed a comprehensive proposal on the table, which foreign countries, diplomats, stakeholders from all kinds of places have examined, are examining, are interrogating, a specific step-by-step how that reconstruction can be undertaken was what we put forward on the 16th of December in 2020. I'm talking about Ninas now, to say, let us, anybody who goes to the 5-point demand, which is now our own 5-point agenda, because we called it 5-point demand because we were inviting the government, the federal government, to come to the table to meet the peoples of Nigeria who have grave constitutional grievances, for which most of them are now looking through the window and door of exit. And it is in that context that we place, on the table what exactly could be done to undertake that inevitable reconstruction, which people are going to go unilateral because their lives are now at stake. Everything else is gone, but now they're alive. And what is that? We say an acknowledgement, a formal acknowledgement that there's a problem that has to be solved. That's number one. Number two, a formal commitment for the decommissioning, towards the decommissioning of that constitution, because our complaint is that we have not made any constitution. What we have in place is a forgery and a fraud, a scam, and that the Nigeria that is, erected upon that fraud and forgery is a fraud against all of us. And therefore, that Nigeria is not our project. You're on a construction site, and more than 70% of the people on that site are working to pull down because it's a disputed project. Some are saying the land belongs to them, others say no, it cannot be theirs. That's the kind of thing going on the construction site we call Nigeria. And I'm firmly on the side of those who insist that we cannot build any further on the rickety foundation. Just really anywhere you see constitution, we're talking about Nigeria. Anywhere you see constitution, remove the word constitution and put Nigeria. Read the sentence again, read the paragraph again, and see what new sense it makes to you. That is when you understand what constitution means from the perspective of union agreement, such that if there's a disputation, if there's a dispute to say we have not agreed, or that we agreed before, the agreement has been overtaken or overturned, it's no longer acceptable to me. Anything but this one that you've imposed on me. That's where we are. So say there must be a commitment to decommissioning that which we all see is an imposition and which is not working. The third is that to put a time frame, because people have been complaining for over 30 years about this bad arrangements, even before 99. There was all this after this military gotten out of the way. People have been talking about sovereign national conference and all kinds of demand for fundamental reconstruction, fundamental re-engineering, fundamental renegotiation of the union. And so we said there must be a time frame to it now. Therefore, we said there must be a formal commitment. That's now demand number 3. There must be a formal commitment for not proceeding to another election on the basis of this constitution. Because if you do not do that, that is the first aid Nigeria needs now. Those who will ignore it, that now that we are talking about it, that Nigeria that is bleeding and about to explode, the most potent first aid that can be administered now to avoid the death of many in the near future is to call off the journey to any further elections under that constitution. We've been through it in the First Republic. The constitutional arrangement had a problem in 1962. They didn't fix it. They wobbled on. Elections came in 1964 because there was in the parliamentary era. the parliamentary elections of the regions happen, and the federal one happened. They don't happen at the same time. So the first one came, and they went into that election. They were still managing the commotion of it. Then the second one came to meet them. In the midst of all of that, the Western region, where the leg of the constitution, that's the constitutional Western region that was suspended by illicitly by the federal government of the time, May 29, 1962, it was that refusal to solve that constitutional breakdown that collapsed the First Republic. It went up in smoke. And so we're back again where everybody's shouting from everywhere. Let's go and fix this. Let's go and put out this fight. Nobody's listening. They're heading to election. And the election is the worst fear you can bring into that kind of debate. Everything is upside down on account of the fact that people are making permutations for who will get the head of the knife and who will get the blade, whose hand will then be around the blade of the knife, because that's how kind of fight happens when elections are loaded into this kind of a dispute. So we said, to put a time frame for when this thing has to be done, we must now, the federal government must announce, like South Africa did with apartheid. These things we are talking about happened in this continent, not too far, not too long ago, in the presence of at least 3/4 of those who are on this call, that a country that found itself in a situation of a disputed constitutional arrangement imposed by a stranger, white-skinned minority on the owners, the majority blacks of South Africa who own the land. That constitution was there for so long, but the owners of the land began to dispute it in every way possible. The ANC was there, all kinds of, PhD, several agitation groups rejecting that apartheid constitution, rejecting apartheid South Africa. And so it came to where the challenge became just unmanageable. And the sitting government of the time, the president broke down and was replaced by the vice president called Frederick de Klerk. And he came to, he had the presence of mind to realize that South Africa would collapse on their head if they didn't address the matter. And on a date in 1990, he went out there and made the broadcast that this constitution can no longer carry this union any further in any progressive way. By then, that constitution had lasted 80 years. It was introduced in 1910. It was resisted every step of the way by the people who were suffering under it, who were excluded under it, who were expropriated under it, who were being killed under it. It took a bit of time to build up to that level where the government now could not function. We are almost at that level where South Africa got to in 1990. And so the government of Frederick de Klerk had to announce that the apartheid constitution had failed. It could not carry the country any further. And they went into a transition. He suspended any further plans for elections under that constitution so that everybody can know for sure that they have come to the end of apartheid. They won't go to another election that will renew the life of that constitution for another 5 years. That's the kind of thing, that's what we are asking, that's what we insist must happen now. And if those we are talking to are not willing to listen, I tell you, the remedy that the owners of the land, more than 75% of the country, we're talking about the South and Middle Belt, those who have been killed, those whose assets have been detained by that constitution, the remedy they are seeking is entirely inalienable. It's called self-determination. Their sovereignty is what they want to take back because it's their sovereignty that was corralled into the Union of Nigeria. That's for number 3, and a definite commitment that no further elections will happen under this constitution. Then number 4, we said the owners, those who are disputing, those who are rejecting that constitution, the owners of the sovereignty, the Yorubas, the Ijo, everybody standing, bringing their own, sovereignty. So there must be now a discussion on the kind of transition, because we have to go to transition. We're not anarchists. We're saying let the government, let there be governance, nominal governance remaining in place in the period like South Africa did. It took them from 1990 to 1994. They set up a body with constituent powers. They had a parliament. It wasn't the business for the parliament at all. They had a parliament, but they set up a body called Codesa. And it was that Codesa that now began to discuss all of what everybody's complaints were. It started with the whites saying that the white minority wanted the country to be divided. so that white can be in one country and black can. They spent almost 2 years debating that. Eventually, they couldn't point at any part of the country where the whites would have to, aggregate, because they spread themselves, all over the place. Nobody wanted to leave their own place. So, okay, let us begin to discuss what would be a multi, what do they call the kind of thing that you mix up everything, and multiracial society, a constitution that can support a multiracial democratic society. It took them 3 years from that point to come to the point where they had elections in 1994. And we're saying our own is not nearly as bad as that, because everybody knows what will work here. We agreed on it before, and then it was toppled, and everybody is now pointing back at that which was thrown away. Can't we go back to it by slowing down, getting into this transition, and working it out? Ike Ekweremadu, when he was in Deputy Senate President, did say that it shouldn't take more than 3 months because of the volume of work that has been done around how it can be done, including Pronaco and all of the processes we had to initiate and execute through the last 22 years. From the time the 1999 Constitution was imposed, because we knew what was in it since it was 1979 that was brought forward. And so that number 4 demand is one in which we say that federal government must now invite the owners of the land. It's not the business of people in government to sit and write a constitution over our head. It's an insult on the owners of the land, people who could be country of their own. Yoruba could be a country of 60 million people if Nigeria is not holding today. The lower Niger territory will be a country of 70 million people holding their own, bigger than more than half of the countries of this world today. And in 5 years, could be among the first 20 countries in terms of anything you can, any indices you may want to use. And so we say it is those people that could be countries of their own, the owners of the sovereignties, that will have to go to that meeting, not appointing your neighbors and friends to come and gather in some hotel, and then you say you're having a national conference. That's just a jamboree. No serious person will pay attention to what politicians gather or whoever they appoint gather. It must be Yoruba mandated, Yoruba delegates mandated to negotiate the sovereignty of Yoruba, because the kind of people Yoruba will send if the future of Yoruba land is being discussed are totally different from the kind of people they might elect at election. Who is going to Senate? Who is going to be governor? If the matter comes to who is going to discuss Yoruba future, I tell you, 3/4 of those who may win elections to go to National Assembly or to go and be governor or president will not even be considered, because they are now looking for more honest people, more clear-minded people, more forward-looking people, and their own statesmen. So that's the difference. We say, let those people who are disputing those constituent components of Nigeria that are disputing the union are the ones who have to come and decide the contents of that transition. What will be the length of time? What will be the mandate of that body that will be set up to manage it? What will be the composition? Who are going to be in it? What are they going to be able to do? What should they not do? How will the government of the period function? Because the owners of the enterprise are now deciding how to repair their failing enterprise. And it is from that point that we now go to the last demand of an announcement of a transition program in which a time-bound transition that will you say that from what we have now, we're shutting down we've shut down the joint election. Therefore, we're going to the meeting. It might take us a year, it might take us 6 months, it might take us 2 years. We put a time frame to it because we have a fair idea what we're trying to go to do. We might use the balance of this tenure of the current government, instead of wasting all this time we're wasting heading to 2023, that is journey to nowhere. Which if all of us who see that there's no prospect of anything getting better, and I can give us guarantee, let us pray that we don't come to a day where we begin to regret that this thing we are sharing now, we ignored it, or that we didn't work with it. If we proceed on this journey, there is a majority that is ready to do just anything you can think of to get rid of this union that has become a union of death for them. Those who have been slaughtered, their assets have been taken. They have been killed now, because Nigeria is defined the way it is defined, and it is that constitution that defines everything. It's that constitution that put the guns in the hands of the people who hold it against those who need to defend themselves but cannot touch gun. Is that constitution that took all the assets of everybody. If anybody thinks that Niger Delta has gone to sleep because some kind of 13% was thrown into the air, and you see the kind of rascals that are managing it and what they're doing with the money, you see the level of poverty that is, multiplying in the midst of the owners of the land, that the monies are being shed in Abuja. If you think that the people of Middle Belt are going to fold their hands and remain in fear, terrorized by people who are shooting and killing them and taking over their lands, you simply have to be out of your mind. And so those are the 5 points of demand, which has not become our own 5-point agenda. We do not require anybody, including the federal government, to agree with us that should be, because the right of those people to their sovereignty, the right of the constituent components of Nigeria to their sovereignty, and therefore their self-determination. That self-determination simply means they decide for themselves how they live in their space, what they do with their neighbors, whether they want to be in union. Those are the things that is not, all the other things are subsidiary. All the other things come only when they've decided that they can be in union, especially with people who have embraced a civilization that requires them to kill the others as infidel, especially in union with people who say them to their faces that all men are not born equal, and therefore some are born to rule others. You saw when Erufai said so publicly that we cannot be equal partners in the union. That's the kind of decision we have to take, whether to remain in that union of master and servant as imposed by this constitution, or to do something else. It does not depend on whether Abuja agrees with us or not, or anybody at all. We're just bidding time for peace, so that all the ordinary innocent people will not die in the numbers they could die. The whole world is discussing this situation. The UN sent a rapporteur mission to come and examine this situation in 2019. We saw it, Agnes Kalaman. She came and they came out with a report that what was wrong with Nigeria, for which blood was flowing all over the place, was that the constitutional arrangement of Nigeria is like pressure cooker for injustice. We can Google it and what other people are discussing about us.
Okay, Mr. Tony. I mean, I think you've analyzed and, of course, laid out the 5 demands of Nina's, which forms your agenda. Let me just bring in Professor Pat into the conversation.
Yeah.
Professor Pat Utomi.
Yes. Right.
What do you make of this 5-point agenda of Nina's?
Well, I guess the starting point is to say that I want to commend the energy and the passion with which Mr. Nnadi and his colleagues have pursued this subject. There's no question that our country has very many unresolved issues, and that it is important that we engage and discuss them. I think that most fair-minded people have no argument about those things. But there are obviously differences in approaches that different people have offered and all of that. As the Yorubas say, Onokon Woja, there are different routes to the market. What is important is a clear examination of the options. When the peoples of Nigeria met at Lancaster House back in the 50s, there were no ultimatums from any sides and all of that. What was required was a good faith effort to speak about a modus vivendi, a way that people can live together. And I'm not sure that there are many natural modern states, or most modern states came as a result of human cohabitations and decisions on how to engage with one another. And sometimes those things are not even in a written constitution, as you can see in spite of a body of conventions in the UK. It's technically not a written constitution. When the people of Scotland felt like exercising their rights to self-determination, they put up a very strong campaign and came pretty close. But in the end, they didn't make it in that effort. And there are those who want to continue it, there are those who say it's enough. It's not also unusual. They can have a prolonged engagement on this matter, as we see in the case of the Catalan in Spain. And I have many friends who are Catalans and who, live with other Spanish countrymen from other parts of Spain. So those kinds of disputations about the crafting of that document of how we live together can go on, and sometimes go on for years, not go on for decades or centuries. What is important is that we have clarity of thought and have decorum in how we proceed. It is true that most of what we have in Nigeria didn't come out of a process of decorum. A lot of what we call our constitution today evolved during military rule. And of course, there were, dominating peoples in the course of military rule. What I want to encourage is that we recognize that the rational process can produce outcomes, and that we, in stating whatever positions we hold, should not negate the right of others to hold different views and express them, and then we can have conversation to result in an outcome. And like I said, Lancaster House was about trying to do that. And something came out that most people today now refer back to with nostalgia and say, look, that's the way we should have been, and all of that. So there's nothing extraordinary or spectacularly wrong in the most of the points that have been raised. An understanding, again, and I like to always go through this history, an understanding of how the doctrine, the concepts of non-interference in internal affairs and the quote-unquote sovereignty of external states and the evolution of the doctrine of self-determination, how they came about, is very important, the historic context. And as I've always tried to it clearly, Europe was in turmoil in the 15th, 14th, those centuries, where it was a state of continuous war. It was almost, savagery in the manner of speaking. Everything was about defending yourself, building fortresses, and so on and so forth. So after the bitter religious wars that began with the defenestration of Prague in 1618 and continued for 30 years, and what I prefer to call a war of balance of power rather than religious wars, because, as I've repeatedly pointed out, it's a bit of a lie to call it religious wars, because French Catholic princes were aligning with some Protestant princes to checkmate the quote-unquote Holy Roman Empire of Germans. And this wars led everybody to certain recognition at some point that, look, we need to just stop and have a structure to have order in the world. This pause and agreement to have order in the world generally came to be known as the Peace of Westphalia, which they all signed up to. It is the Peace of Westphalia that led to this non-interference clause, where minority groups were trapped and oppressed in many states, but the world just refused to look at their rights, because he generally thought that a few people's rights being impinged on was a lesser evil, if you will, than the disorder that the world was in before the Peace of Westphalia. And that regime went on for quite a long time until we arrived in the 20th century, where there was clearly a number of genocides. The genocide of, by the way, of course, the Albanian genocide was what gave us the word genocide. It didn't exist before. Years after it, actually, people trying to take up a course around it, created the word genocide. Of course, the huge, great genocide of the 20th century was the Holocaust. And let's be very frank, one of the terrible genocides of the 20th century was the Nigerian Civil War. However, history generally treats some of this differently, based on how people want to reach new accommodation. As terrible as Nigerian Civil War may have been, let us be fair, the process of reintegration was remarkably gracious and smooth, if you will. And I say this as someone who lived through the Civil War, saw the war from the two sides, and then within 9 years of the end of that Civil War, somebody from a part of the country that was in secession was vice president of the country. What really has made our case a challenge is that that process could not continue because certain elements frustrated what could have been the ultimate healing. I believe that if the politics of 1979 had rolled through to 1987, perhaps a final healing stage may have gone past, but that was frustrated. It didn't happen, and we continued down a certain path. Now, to return to the sovereignty issues and self-determination. Yes. The effect of those genocides in the 20th century was that people began to rethink this idea of subsuming minority rights to the so-called broader stability. And after World War II, the Universal Declaration of Fundamental Human Rights by the United Nations began a new phase in thinking, in which the basic rights of people could lead to self-determination, and self-determination began its ascendancy as doctrine. Even though it was in ascendance, it was a gradual creeping process. As I've said before, I think in one of these conversations, I went to visit the Nigerian ambassador to the United States at that time, Professor George Obiozo, while he was in Washington one day, and he had just returned from New York. And in our conversation, he said, one of the people in New York, an old friend of his, said to him, George, you remember how many members of the United Nations there were a couple of years ago? We have seen that an addition of X number of new states. And most of these new states did not come from decolonization or anything like that. They came from the fracturing of states that existed before. Soviet Union contributed so many, the breakup of this, India, Pakistan, this, that. He said, if the Nigerian Civil War were fought today, that person said to Professor Obiozo, Nigeria would have contributed several new members to the United Nations. But in 1967, self-determination was still a creeping acceptance thing. It was just growing on the international, if you will, conscience. And now we've come a lot further. However, how to pursue self-determination needs to involve a certain order, And for me, actually, it is really a safeguard. The fact that people can turn to it is a safeguard of people's rights in a way that it should force politicians to then think in an umbrella way of the good of all. Because once people perceive that they get a fair shake in a union, I think most people prefer to live in broader unions. I mean,
yes, so Prof, what is at the heart of this debate now is how to, the process to achieve the outcome that you described. Now, so in relation to what Mr. Tony has made submission, one of the demands they're making is that there should be a wholesale decommissioning and jettisoning of the 1999 Constitution, which forms the basis of Nigeria as a federation, right? So essentially, they're calling for the Constitution to be completely disregarded, and then a new one should be reborn. So now, I just want to ask if you also think this is a viable process to achieve this outcome that you described, or perhaps you have an alternative idea, as a recommended process that Nigerians can achieve this process of achieving greater protection of minority rights and also a greater level of control.
If a constitution is rewritten, it is rewritten. It is a document that becomes a fresh one. I mean, it's no big deal about how you rewrite a constitution. Even a group that I lead, the NCF, has a constitution writing committee, drafting committee, whatever it is, that has already almost finished its work. It's taking the constitutions from the Macpherson Constitution through to the constitutional conferences, including that of Jonathan, and looked at some of the issues of today and begun to produce a completely new draft of a constitution for the people of Nigeria. And the idea is to then put that document for Nigerian people to debate, to discuss, and out of these discussions, have something that a constituent assembly can promulgate into a foundational law, a ground norm for the country. I don't think that there's anything extraordinary about this. This has been done many times in history and can be done again. The problem with the 1979 Constitution, or even worse still, the 1999 Constitution, is that the people were not allowed a good engagement. This 99 more than because the so-called wise men of the 1979 Constitution, after debating, put it to the government. The 1999 one was just more or less, a couple of people in the villa or wherever it was, saying this is what is good for them, So yes, a process of public conversation around whatever document needs to take place, has to take place. And this is what should guide what the outcome will be.
So can it be surmised that your position is that if there's indeed going to be a redraft of the Constitution because of the many problems associated with the document, the process of making it a law has to go through the existing political structure that we have, which is the National Assembly, just to cite an example.
Nothing says that. Don't forget that there is a crisis of legitimacy surrounding the current order. I mean, when people are talking about, when the National Assembly started looking at the Constitution, most people just sneered at it and basically said, who elected them? So, because the elections have been problematic in Nigeria, there has been a tendency to assume by citizens a legitimacy problem with the extant order. And so it will not receive acceptance except where politics as the art of the possible wants to just rule over. But I think that people want something that better reflects that they, the people who were involved in the process, because they don't think that they elected those in the current National Assembly.
Right. Thank you, Prof. I will just go back to Mr. Tony Nnadi now. But before I do so, I'd like to announce to the audience that we have Mr. Olashupo Shashore on stage. Now, he's a legal practitioner and the founding partner in the law firm of Africa Law Practice Nigeria and Company. He's a senior advocate of Nigeria, and he's a former Attorney General and Commissioner for Justice in Lagos State. Thank you, Mr. Shupo Shashore, for joining us. So, Mr. Tony Nnadi, Professor Pat basically introduced a legitimacy problem. Now, in the document that contains your 5 demands, you did say that you are the accredited representatives of the indigenous nationalities of Nigeria's southern and middle belt territories, right? Some people would ask, who accredited you? Mr. Tony, are you there?
Yes, I'm.
Yeah, did you hear my question?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you now. Did you hear my
question?
Hear me now? Yes, I can hear you, Mr. Tony.
People may ask, right? You say people might ask who are accredited.
Yes. Mr. Tony, we cannot hear you. I think you're having hindrance and some challenge your network.
I don't know. I can hear you.
Your network is choppy. Okay, all right, just go ahead. Make yourself.
Right. What we have on the table is, we say we're declaring a union dispute, and we've not at all assumed any mandate that goes beyond our natural, our rights as owners of the land that has been called Nigeria. As many of us as are complaining from, all the sections that were complaining, we went into processes, insisting that our sovereignty had been hijacked by the constitutional arrangement that had been imposed, moving away from what was agreed in Lancaster House, and refusing to go back to that discussion even after the agreement in Aburi got, abandoned, and it became a war. And the fundamental agreements reached in Aburi, in Lancaster, being that we had to be a federation, and it took many years to reach those fundamental agreements, that we had to be a federation to be one political union, and that we had to be a secular union, because Ahmadu Bello wanted Sharia even as far back as pre-independence, and he went before Williams Commission because the Middle Belt, led by people like Joseph Tucker, who are mainly Christians, said they will not remain a part of the Northern region as one federating unit if Sharia were to be, adopted there. And so the Williams Commission settled it by removing Sharia and bringing what they call the Penal Code. So that was a very fundamental, basis of Middle Belt remaining a part of that Northern region. And if bound by one language, one lingua franca they call Hausa, you can then imagine how much distance that situation, how much more unwilling the balance of Nigeria, particularly the southeastern half of southern Nigeria, where there are no Muslims at all and no language affinity, will view a situation where Sharia is brought back. So these are some of the things that have now distressed the federation itself, the union itself. So the questions go beyond what is written back to have we agreed to be in union? Because the basis of like the company, the regular company, there's the memorandum of association and there's the article of association. There are two different documents. The memorandum of association is where the promoters and shareholders and stakeholders come together to say, we will form ourselves into XYZ. What they're discussing at that point is the formation of an entity that will have a life of its own, a company. In the case of a country, it is those who have been countries of their own that are coming together to discuss how to be one political union. And that was what transpired in Lancaster. Those that could have been three countries that could have gone their way, went to discuss how they could be one political union. And they reached they had some fundamental agreements of how they could be that one political union. And these were the things that got toppled and progressively, their sovereignties then got confiscated by a rogue federal government that emerged at the point the Federation of Nigeria collapsed. And when I say Federation of Nigeria collapsed, we still have a country. People must understand that. We still have a country, but we no longer have a federation. The Federation of Nigeria died from the point the 5 constitutions that defined that federation, that settled the terms of that relationship, got toppled. And back to what actually will constitute will be called constitution amongst lawyers. I'm happy more lawyers are in the house now. The question of when you go to the preamble, for you to understand what is missing, so that the solution doesn't start with writing another constitution. The solution has to go all the way to what went wrong. What went wrong is that the sovereignties that came together have been hijacked when the terms of coming together, was overthrown. And the people that hijacked it are the ones that eventually imposed by decree progressively between 1967 and 1979, processing all those decrees into what became 1979 Constitution. They called the Constituent Assembly. That Constituent Assembly finished its work and turned in a clean, what they call a clean copy to the Supreme Military Council of the time, headed by Obasanjo. Murtala Mohammed, who commissioned it, had been killed in 1976. And by the time he got to Obasanjo, between himself and his Supreme Military Council of the time, he woke up on the 21st of September 1978 to announce 17 amendments to the finished work of the Constituent Assembly. So the 1979 edition, because I hear some people sometimes say, oh, if you don't accept 99, then let's fall back to 79 and build from there. We didn't make any constitution in 1979 because it was the Supreme Military Council that decided what became constitution, and it's written there in the body of the document. Then they carried it forward in 1999, using the same opportunity to give life back to it because it became the one who had to. So the second part of what you find in what had to be done, as you can see from the preamble that says, we the people of Nigeria, having solemnly resolved to live firmly and solemnly, resolved to live in unity as one indivisible and indissoluble country, Nigeria. Then he goes further down to say, do hereby make and give unto ourselves the following constitution. Now, these are two deeply flawed claims. These are two false egregious falsehoods that we came to discuss and to submit our sovereignty, because that's basically what it means. That we the Yoruba, we the Jaw, we the Ogoni. Those who are looking at this, the disputations casually should know that the Jaw is saying that they've not submitted their lands into any union. Yoruba is saying they've not submitted.
Yes, Mr. Tony. So, now you're trying to usher in a new process by which all of these constituent parts of the country, would come together to negotiate a new reality for themselves. And no, at Ninas, you're basically calling for this new process, with the claim that you're accredited representatives of the people. Can you provide the legitimacy to back the statement?
Hold on. There is a proposition. On the table. And the processes that led to that point. I'm happy Professor Utomi is in the house. As far back as if at the time Nadeko was doing his business of going on behalf of the people to challenge the prevailing situation, they took all the risks. The soldiers eventually left the government house, and there was a return to civil rule. but they didn't do the business of constitution that should have been used to bring back that civil rule. Who mandated them? Who mandated them? Nobody. But they acted on behalf of a prevailing, what could be seen as the prevailing will of the people at the time, that soldiers should leave the government house. The unfinished business of Nnadi was what then came as Pronaco to say, look, we've come back to civil rule now, but we still have a whole number of things standing upside down. Can we get into the process? We waited for government, to lead that process. There was nothing that was not done to get the government to see that constitution that they used to bring back democracy in 1999 could not take us any further. It was in fact within the first 3 weeks of the introduction of that 1999 constitution that the lawyers had a meeting. I clearly remember Utomi Williams was in that meeting, and he declared what came out in 1999 as constitution as a fraud and a forgery. Utomi Williams himself, who was involved in the origination of the one of 1979. But the government will not listen. I did engage Obasanjo on this subject matter for the first, from the time he got sworn in all the way to where they were now heading towards quietly and privately, passing written materials, which only a few people, Bolage was privy to some of those things that were passed to him. There are some other people, it might not be safe at this time to narrate what went to bed. We did engage to say, look, this thing will lead us to this kind of, catastrophic situation that will become a lot more difficult to manage if we don't do it now that it's still fresh. He refused. And it was when the 2003 elections came, and because towards the end of his first tenure, he said, if we get into this now, elections are too close. People may misread it. Once after the election, right after the election, he then began to appoint people who are going to build El Dorado on top of that rickety constitutional foundation. It was right after the 2003 elections when it became clear that he wasn't going to listen because he had his roots had gotten to the ground, that we decided that the sovereignty of the people belong to the people, and therefore that the people are going to go into a meeting to decide the terms upon which their sovereignty will be, worked together. And if they can't find common ground, by then, remember it was in year 2000 that 12 contiguous states in the far north of the country imposed Sharia almost simultaneously. So he gave an indication that they consulted among themselves. He gave an indication that it was what they chose, because the House of Assembly, passed Sharia, and their governors signed them and began to set up a Hizbah and all kinds of things to enforce the Sharia. So the rest of us were looking at it with dismay and disbelief, because even that 1999 Constitution in Section 10 is so clear that it says the government of the Federation or that of a state shall not adopt any state religion. Full stop. That's the shortest section in the entire Constitution. And so, if you look at that very clear provision, that is also fundamental, because that's what makes Nigeria a secular state under this current dispensation. And you have this number of states that are contiguous and that acted, simultaneously in the same period. You will see that they have basically seceded from the secular union of Nigeria, and they began to dislocate people from other parts of the country in the name of enforcing Sharia. The businesses were, truncated. Even now, you see once in a while they go and bring trailer loads of beer bottles and they destroy them. People have to, close down hotels and all kinds of things that make it impeded. They live in Port Harcourt unmolested doing their business. They live in Lagos unmolested doing their business. Why am I to submit myself to that kind of a danger? And my child can be sent to go and do youth service in that kind of a place, and she gets into a class in Bauchi, and the people decide to kill the teacher because she was wearing trousers of NYSC. How can we be in that? Is that not enough emergency already for us to say, look, let's stop and see what is going wrong here? And so the complaint of those who are saying they can't live with this constitution any further is that what changed are not marginal things. They are things that go to the heart of their existence. And let me round up with the Pronaco that we summoned, the same arrowheads of Nadiko, Chief Nohoro, and the rest of them were the ones who now, having waited for Obasanjo for 5 years, announced sometime in 2004 that we were going to call a meeting of the owners of Nigeria to go back to that discussion with their anyhow they represent themselves. But we have to be sure that we have everybody coming, and they will decide something. Let us then see whether our sovereignty have been confiscated by government, and if it has, then we try it out. Obasanjo again went on national TV to say that if we called such a meeting, that we were committing treason, and that it became a pushing and pulling situation. When he saw the kind of people that stepped forward to join us, nobody told him to dress back, and then we went on into that Pronaco, and I'm happy Professor Utomi was here. He chaired. Professor Utomi chaired the economic session in that is what economic plans do we want in our constitution, away from what we have now. At least he was part of that. But that initiative took 2 years to come through between 2005 and 2006. We sat in Lagos, we sat in Port Harcourt, we sat in Enugu repeatedly. We sat in Jos, we sat in Kano, came back to conclude in Lagos. And the people who were doing this were the very ones who have had to go to war over this issue. Ojukwu, right, who had to fight, trying to get Eastern region out of genocide, was part of, when you look at all the groups that were carrying arms against the state of Nigeria at the time, we persuaded them to put their guns. The government could not talk to them at that point. Gani Adams and his OPC forced the police to be hiding their uniform in Yoruba land as they go to work. That was how bad it was. But we persuaded them to put all those guns aside, come into this process. Aside Dokuba and his volunteer force, we persuaded them. The people doing Biafra, Wazirike, Masop. And if after that entire process, we managed to have a draft that was based on what the regional blocs had brought as their demands, because a federation cannot have only one constitution. Any lawyer who is drafting one constitution for a federation that will be passed by any mechanism does not understand what a federation is. And we're saying that a federation is a union of constitutions. Those who have to federate are the ones who will now come back to the question of what process. The process that will suffice will be the process that will satisfy, that will resolve those two, false claims in that preamble, that we, the people, have done something, have agreed, and then that we have now reduced that agreement to these articles. It is those two-stage process that we put in this demand. So anybody who is questioning, who are we? We've not decided anything. We say, this country, all of us agree that we're in trouble. We agree that that trouble has become, is degenerating by the hour. Security has broken down. Electricity is not coming from anywhere. Elections will never be better. Infrastructure can only get worse. And all those things are locked down into that constitution. And those who locked those things down knew exactly what they were doing. How are we going to solve the question of 36 days? Which president is going to now dismantle it? At what point, my question would then be to the Professor Utomi, when will these things be done? That's the biggest question, because those who are insisting it has to be done now, after 22 years. You saw Bruce Wayne the other day. He came asking, that is it not absurd that we have allowed this thing to remain for 22 years? Because he has a fair idea of how things were and how rapidly things are degenerating. And human lives are involved here. We may be in the comfort of Lagos. I just came back from just the other day, where I spent plenty of time with delegates from all over the Middle Belt, from Gombe, Taraba, Nasarawa, all those places where people have been slaughtered, Southern Kaduna, Adara, everywhere, Benue. They are living in hell. They don't know who will survive the next day. And we're here carrying on as if everything is okay, we do it at our own time. The basic question is, when will this thing be done? What process has anybody else put on the table for how it has to be done? Has the National Assembly let me to be the one discussing?
Yes, Mr. Tony, let me
Why can't we stop and fix it?
Yes. just in a moment, Mr. Tony, let me just latch on to your question of the when, the process should take place. And I will just go to Professor Pat with a question. Now, NINAS as a group or as a multi-ethnic alliance of people have announced a constitutional force majeure, right? Yes. And one part of their demands now is that the federal government of Nigeria should suspend the conduct of further general elections under, quote and unquote, the disputed 1999 constitution. So my question to you, Professor Pat Utomi, is that, legally speaking, is it possible for anyone to invoke a force majeure clause in the Nigerian constitution? Is there a provision for that, legally speaking, Professor Pat? Professor, are you there? Prof.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now. Did you hear my question?
Yeah. In public conversation, to resolve political issues, people can take all kinds of positions as part of trying to raise the emphasis of their position. Chief Ayo Adebanjo, for example, has said and repeatedly said that he does not think that it is a good idea to talk elections in 2023 unless issues of structural reforms have been engaged. But as I said, politics is the art of the possible. You can hold those positions and force those to become issues if some people would rather press an alternative approach. In the end, the engagement, as simple as possible, in my own preference, will result in some trade-offs. Okay, let's get to work quickly on these things so that we can have certain things passed before elections can take place, or let us agree that the major subject for debate in the run-up to those elections, for example, will be these matters, so that the mandate of whoever, quote unquote, comes out of the process will be to immediately go to work on ensuring that these new principles, these new constitutions, these new whatever are implemented. Perhaps at a list of bargaining, one of the things we accept is that the subnational units, even as they are or desire to be, should begin to write their own constitutions now. And part of the campaign issues will be around subnational constitutions that will now go into place on a post-election. All kinds of different positions that you can begin and speak to. I don't know if I would use the term force majeure, but surely negotiations are part of human accommodation in society. So taking a position should be the basis for conversation around what's the best way to resolve any knotty problem.
But Prof, can any group in Nigeria today invoke a force majeure? Is there a provision for that?
That's the point I was making. I just made the point that I'm not so sure that invoking a force majeure, but it is a legitimate conversation or bargaining or whatever. However, it's just like, that's why we say politics is out of the possible. Can a group prevent people from going to work any day of the week? But they've successfully done it in the Southeast for months now running. So really, what people can leverage as power. What is power? The famous Robert Dahl definition of power: ability to make A do B, what B would not ordinarily want to do. Those who have prevented people from going to work on a certain day have exercised power, and the trade-off of power is part of what the conversation is in politics and public life. So I think one should not probably get over-fixated with declaration of force majeure, or who has the right to do that or not do that. It's just part of leveraging power-based elements to reach a position of conversation and negotiation.
That's right, the way that I'm just going to ask one more question before I go back to Mr. Nnadi. Now, in the declaration of Ninas, did it say that they've exhausted every democratic, people-driven process to seek an orderly solution to some of the constitutional problems that the country is facing? Do you think that assessment is correct? Have we truly exhausted every democratic, people-driven process available to us?
Is that me? Is that for me to respond to?
Yes, I'm just asking because they're making the claim that they've exhausted every democratic.
We have not at all. We have not even begun to look at the least, not talk of exhausting them. I think that, I go back to this question of rational public conversation. We have not had enough rational public conversation. What we tend to have, unfortunately, which is why this issue ends where it is that we get into this emotive trading of verbs and calling of names, and we really don't have a conversation, and so we're not really moving anywhere. The art of negotiation is a very fine one, and it does involve, rationally engaging and chipping away at positions that are held usually on emotional grounds, and so we need to have more of an acceptance that this conversation is important, and therefore have the conversation so that we can build a new modus vivendi that is just for all the people. This is very important.
All right. So, final question now, Professor, before I go to Mr. Nnadi. Now, by way of solution, what do you consider political priority general election?
Well, I think that it is important that we begin to look at a constitution that's focused on the people. Constitutions often pride themselves as being people's constitutions. But what we have in Nigeria today is really a fairly obscene arrangement of state capture. And this has prevented government policy from being directed at the common good of all, being directed at solving major social problems, because it allows power arrangement to be of gladiators who capture power for their own use, in their own interests, and usually involves massive goal displacement, where public goals are replaced with private goals, and the system is corrupted internally in such a manner that the major essence of state apparatus would be to lead to a material advantage or power advantage of those who capture the state. And so the urgency for an arrangement that cares about people is one that we can not play with, because Nigeria is lying prostrate today because the whole arrangement of power is to advance individual interests rather than serving the common good of all.
Right. Thank you, Prof. Mr. Nnadi, do we still have you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. So your first majeure, the one that you proclaimed, has a 90-day expiration period within which you will then now enforce certain things. Now, the question that that immediately comes to mind is that after this 90-day expiration,
I'm not sure you read what you wrote. If you did, that was not the 90 days for the federal government to do certain things, just marginally acknowledge. And then thereafter, the only thing we said we were going to do, and that is still standing, but not yet done. If after all efforts to get into that discussion, those who say they've conquered us, they've captured us, they're entitled to killing us, continuing their journey, especially towards election, that will be mandated by that constitution killing us. The only thing we said we were going to do in that proclamation, in that force majeure, is that we will then have to reconsider our allegiance to that constitution, the limited toleration to that constitution. Go back to the proclamation, you will see it in black and white. And we're not rushing to the notice to the federal government. Instead of coming to us, they went to the National Assembly, trying to initiate some emergency constitutional, amendment process. But the subject matters they listed were all taken from the grave constitutional grievances we listed in that, proclamation. That tells us they saw what we put forward.
Pete, are you there?
Mr. Nnadi, we can't hear you anymore in case you're hearing me. Well, I think he's suffering network challenge problem. While we wait for him to come back, I was just going to speak to Professor Utomi about some of the specifics now. So because a lot of people are actually thinking to say, what are some of the political demands we should be making as we head into the next election, especially because Nigeria faces structural problems that many have come to identify. So Ninas are presenting an idea to say that perhaps elections should not even hold at all, and that every political process should be suspended, while focus should be immediately paid to everyone coming together to renegotiate what it means to be a part of the Nigerian state. So, Prof, if you are of the opinion that elections should indeed take place, so what are some of the political demands you think that Nigerians should be making of the parties that are participating in the elections?
Well, I think, first of all, Nigerians should demand of all who seek public office a strategy of national economic reconstruction. The economy is in a prostrate situation right now. What is the strategy besides just collecting rents from oil and sharing? How are we building that? And then, let's get away from this business of marching platitudes to, we have this economic reform agenda, this, that. How should we be governed to raise the quality of our material existence? Some of us have consistently offered a national economic strategy that, first of all, is massively rooted in job creation based on factor endowments, to which we around which we seek to build global value chains that we can completely prepare and, if you will, embed ourselves into.
Sorry, the network went off. Can you hear me now?
Yes, just hold on. Just hold on, Mr. Nnadi. I'll come back to you shortly.
An educational system that from get-go prepares people, again, this principle of subsidiarity, decentralization. If the main endowment of a part of the country is rubber, then primary education in that area will have components that teach elements of how you plant, harvest, process rubber, such that by the time a young person there is in SS1, 2, they're equipped enough to actually start businesses or join companies that are active in the value chain of rubber, from the tapping of it to the making of tires and all kinds of rubber-based products. This way, we can assure our people of a demographic dividend out of our youth bulge. And he has no clue how to advance, the quality of life of those he serves. And these are the kinds of things that I think should be fundamental issues before anybody who is thinking about elections.
Yeah, can I go on?
Thank you, Prof. Okay, right. Mr. Nnadi, you can go on, but please just address something that you said. We just want to obtain clarity very quickly. So you said that if the government fails to meet your demand within the 19-day period, the groups would reconsider their continued.
Will include people who are not that federal government to whom we address, and that will include governors and the other people. And we said, okay, we put out 30 days for governors and other elected officials, including senators, and because they all come from somewhere, House members and all of that. Let's take 30 days to get into conversation with them. Again, instead of coming to forward in that conversation, they went to Asaba in that period to say, because of the pressure coming from their own people who saw the solution to their problems in what were placed on the table, the governors went to Asaba and said, all right, you see, we're going to ban open grazing. And the question then became, how are you going to enforce? The people who are invading come with AK-47. You go and pass law that nobody can come. You can what were placed on the table. No governor can issue under this constitution. No governor can issue one rifle to anybody. If governor gives you rifle that the federal government did not give, whether you were vigilante or state security they set up by themselves, you will be guilty of an offense for which you can be shot at sight for being in possession of that gun. That's how bad it is. And so, are you not then double speaking if you say you want to ban and you ignore the question of, the constitution that bars you from government? What can we let us engage them? What of the international community, international stakeholders, the owners of the oil and gas assets, and all kinds of other stakes in this place? So we gave another 120 days just to demonstrate to everybody that we are not anarchists, and the issues are so clearly spelled out. The time frame, the mechanisms and the processes. We even, adopted a document of 2018, an open memo to President Buhari on this, debate on restructuring, because he went to France in that period, sometime in 2018. He went to France, I think it was in November, 2018. He went to France to declare that all of those who are asking that one thing or the other changes, who are talking about restructuring, they do not know what they are talking about. They don't seem to understand what they are talking about or how it can ever be undertaken, And so this process that have been on continuously since after Nadeko has accumulated a body of knowledge Nigeria can tap into today. And if you thought they were all schoolboys, we have, as some of us, if you look at the list of signatories, you will see the people who there's nobody in government now that can say he has seen more than some of the people who are signatories. 127. We have a former vice president who resigned his office on account of the Nigeria being taken into OIC through the back door. We have all kinds of people who have been through all kinds of things on account of how Nigeria is working. And so we come back to what is it that had to be discussed by the people who own these sovereignties. It was in that period that you saw those who went out on the street to say it loudly by themselves. You saw it in Ibadan, you saw it in Akure and all the other state capitals of Western Nigeria. You saw them out there in New York and Washington, telling the whole world that we have a dispute that could explode any moment. ISIS was coming here, and we were shouting that our government was hand in glove with the people who are killing us. They even told us that they are coming from outside. What are you doing about it? No, you can't touch gun. And the people who are coming from outside all have AK-47, sacking communities after community. And so we made sure that in those 120 days, the peoples of Nigeria were given the benefit of seeing exactly what the problem was at close quarters and how it could be solved in a manner that will involve them. And so having done that mobilization, we went out to New York at the 76th session of the UN General Assembly to again say loudly, since the UN itself had enough concern about this in 2019 to send a rapporteur mission headed by Agnes Callamard. So we're saying that action of reconsideration of our allegiance is not bound by the 90 days that was at the head of it. That 90 days was for the federal government. That mobilization for proceeding to that reconciliation, whatever anybody wants to interpret it to mean, let them continue to interpret it. But let it be known that we are the ones standing between all the capacities for self-help and the use of the whatever could be used for that self-help. We are telling everybody that, look, there's a framework, because in that open memo we sent to the president, Guardian newspaper did publish it on it was on the 16th of November in 2018. Guardian newspaper. Anybody can go and access it. That's exactly this restructuring is in terms of content. What is the outcome that can come? How will it be undertaken? Who will undertake it? When can it be done? We spelled out all those things in a manner that we challenge anybody who could come with a better proposition for how it will be done to come forward. They are not coming forward, and the APC we know had included it in their manifesto in terms of time, in terms of engaging somebody saying it hasn't at all been engaged. We are saying we have exhausted. Why do I say so? When Abiola won his election and they were not going to swear, they were not going to swear him in, the meeting that became Nnadi was one in which Abiola committed. We said to him, look, if we were to help and this mandate is recovered, the problem is that the constitution that can sustain Nigeria is not in place. Are you going to retain what they imposed before, or will you agree with us that we have to go back to being a federation? Abiola committed. He said he will not govern except that he will only, that his first program will be to, get it underway, get it sorted out, so that he will govern with that constitution. We agree that even if that is all he does, that he won't be looking at, that would be more than enough to say they have corrected what went wrong in the foundation of our federation. Unfortunately, the fight went on, and he didn't make it to government house. Then we went on to, everybody always came out claiming that they were going to do it if they got there. Yeah, I don't want to mention names of those who had, who rode on the back of this whole process to take themselves to government house. But particularly, and I can talk about Buhari because he's now president. Buhari was part of Prof. Utomi, happy you're here. Buhari was part of the foreign delegation that came to the Pronaco because it came to where they wanted to boycott, they wanted to stay away. in that far part of the north that had imposed Sharia. But when we got their younger elements to come and participate, eventually people like Mutama Sule began to tell them that because America sent us our mission, European Union sent us our mission, who were monitoring what we were doing, because it was surprising to them that any group could assemble, all of the country. There was no language group, there was no section of the country that didn't have some kind of delegation, coming to, represent them in that discussion. And so people like Buhari then turned up and began, and Syed Abubakar, the one that is Sultan in Sokoto now. So we engaged them to the point where there was an outcome when the draft that came from it eventually came. Buhari came back to us, to Inohoro particularly, to say he was going to contest the election, and that if he won the election, having been involved in all of this, he was in a better position to do all of what needed to be done. Of course, called me to that meeting, and I told him point blank that it's not a matter that is not something that can be fixed by you are going to become president. If you are president, you're only going to be one person. There will be 36 people who won elections as governor. What are you going to do? Because the changes we require will go to the structure of the federation first. How did we come about 36 states? How did we come about 7 local government areas? And there are people who will assemble in Abuja on account of being senators or house members or even the constituencies that are made up of those local governments. If we're going to unbundle all those things, at what point are you going to persuade them to dress aside so they can be done? Why don't we do it before we begin to go to election? Right. So now we go from there. Eventually, Bakari turns up, and then again we were doing something that we called change Nigeria. That we must change Nigeria in order to save it. Bakari comes to say, "Oh no, we have to save it first, and then change it in government house." We talked quite privately. It didn't work. We had to come public. That was what shut down the Save Nigeria that he turned the whole thing into. It wasn't Save Nigeria that we set out to do. And so, again, he took the crowd that came from his brief interaction with us into the streets, and then towards government going to join the same Buhari that had been in and out of our space. Eventually it became APC. Eventually they put it in their manifesto that they will go to do this restructuring. What happened? That was among the first things they disowned when they got there. How many years has passed? You look at Atiku again. Well, another round is coming. But in 2016, when Atiku saw that this discussion about restructuring had taken center stage everywhere, somehow he began to speak very publicly about it, that Nigeria will collapse on our head if we don't fix it. We reached out to him to could it be that he's coming to that understanding that we can proceed? Then we went and sat down with him. Anybody who wants to know what transpired in that meeting can click on YouTube right now and search the title Nigeria at the Valley of Decision. I repeat, YouTube, Nigeria at the Valley of Decision. We went over to Abuja, sat down with Atiku, and began to ask him, what do you mean by the restructuring? Because he was looking like somebody who wanted to grab the matter by the throat. And he told us what he was talking about. Then we shared with him what we were doing, because we had gone to that meeting as custodians of that body of knowledge of how this thing can be undertaken. Eventually, he said to me, can you please, now that you have explained this thing to this level, can you please put it in writing? I'm in a position to bring the North, that North that refused, Iowa Consultative, Middle Belt, the National Assembly, I'm in a position to bring them so that the South that's already, together in it, we can come together. That there's no way we won't be able to persuade the Buhari and whoever is federal government for us to fix this in that Nigeria will collapse up on our head if it is not done. I said to him, sir, this will be the third occasion. If we don't use this information to solve this problem before we begin to discuss another election, say, we're not. How can Nigeria survive to the point of election in 2019 if we don't solve it? Eventually, these things were written and brought back. We sat down again, all of us present, and interrogated, what was brought in terms of operational understanding of how it can be done. Immediately, that document was handed over. That was the end of discussion. The next thing I saw was that a book was written in which article now became the main proponent of restructuring and the best possible way of getting to restructuring. That was how the PDP ticket ended up in his hand in Port Harcourt. With the kind of thing we agreed, because I told him in that meeting, in the presence of 9 other people, that if that information is used, is again used, because it had happened twice with Buhari team and the Bakares team, that they took away what we thought we were going to use to solve the problem to go and politic and try to get to power, and then abandoned it, as if it wasn't ever discussed. I said, if that were to happen, you have us to contend with. You have us to contend with. If instead of solving the problem, you decide to go and get power with the information you have, that was exactly what happened. He used that thing to go and get the PDP ticket, and I had to tell somebody who was at the pinnacle of the PDP structure at the time to say, look, this ticket that you have given out for this transaction of restructuring was obtained by this kind of fraud, and you are all going to have us to contend with. Let the election come, let that election be won, and let us see how anybody can begin to govern without solving that problem, because we discussed it. I had to point out that the reason I branched
just hold on a moment. Please hold on.
Hold on a second. Hold on. The reason I had to say this, the impression that we are impatient. I'm just telling us the kind of engagements that had happened with people who have gone to government house, who have won election. I think who won that election, all of us know. But if he were to be sworn in, I can assure you no restructuring will take place the same way APC did. And so we are all of us who have watched almost helplessly how people are being slaughtered, how electricity is still being discussed at the level of 5,000 megawatts, and we saw one incoherent fellow that came out telling us about how Siemens was going to do one miracle or the other to do electricity. When electricity, the capacity for electricity is locked down by that constitution on the exclusive list. There's nothing anybody's going to do to fix electricity, or except that constitution goes down. The capacity for security is locked down by that constitution. People are being slaughtered all over the place. There's nothing that will improve except that constitution goes down. Infrastructure is gone. I'm dead.
Yes. If you just hold on a moment, Mr. Nnadi, and I just hope you answer this very quickly. I don't think that what is at the heart, what is in question is the quality of your patience, rather your power to enforce some of the demands you've made, and also the consequence if the government fails to implement your proposed demands. Now, speaking to that, if the election in 2023 does hold, as it's likely to do so, and the people participate in that election, does that not pose a problem to your claim to represent the people and to also, be the more or less like represent their frustration with the system? Because by participating in the election, it simply means that they are certifying its legitimacy. What's your
wonderful? Yes, that's part of why I've been coming to these clubhouses and going everywhere, all over the country, all over the world, to tell our people that constitution is the source of your misery. Whether it is your oil and gas assets that are seized, or you are being slaughtered across the middle belt, or you cannot elect who will govern you in Imo, you vote and they bring the fourth person and make him president. Whatever is your complaint, or corruption is so injurious to you, you want it to end, or nepotism has come to where you are the one suffering it. Whatever is your complaint in this land, impunity. This constitution is the source of it. Election is the only mechanism for renewing the life of that constitution. Political parties are the only people who contest election. All of the political parties in Nigeria subscribe to that apartheid constitution because of what they will get when they win. And therefore, no matter who amongst them wins, PDP, APC, ABGA, is going to have to swear to govern by and defend that constitution, meaning that we are going to have exactly what we have as the tap from which all these evils flow. 36 states will remain, 68 items of exclusive list will remain, impunity will grow, corruption will multiply, and the life poverty will grow all some more. You saw how the Naira has been sliding. And so we're telling our people that vote in that voting stage in that election will happen in 2023. They have every day between now and that time to agree with us according to our proposition that we can proceed to go to renew the life of that constitution. Whatever they're going to have to do to stop those who are dragging them, the leaders of the church that are asking them to go and get PVC to renew their enslavement, the lawyers that are pretending that there's no problem because they do election, petition and EFCC case that flow from corruption. All of those people that are civil society people that say free and fair election is what will solve this fundamental problem. Even the question of leadership that can emerge. Who are you going to bring that can fetch water with baskets? Even if you bring an angel to come and govern Nigeria now, I can show you how that angel will fail because of the provisions in black and white of that constitution, which no president is going to be able to resolve just because he has become president, no matter how knowledgeable he is in all the areas. If the constitution says I cannot generate electricity, which I have the capacity to generate, and then the president, the person who wants electricity for me is saying, no, don't talk about constitution, let's go and do election first. Whoever emerges, section 6, subsection 6C of that constitution absolve the president of responsibility towards the citizen. I want any lawyer present in this house to tell me it is not so. All the benefits of the citizen are listed in chapter 2 of the constitution. Equal treatment, security and welfare, and all kinds of good things of life. Everything you can imagine that is good is in that chapter 2. But there's a clause in section 6, subsection 6C, that makes it, that absolves the government of the responsibility towards doing that. And it removes the jurisdiction of the court from hearing you if those things are not done. The other day I was surprised that some of my colleagues went to court to file a suit for 50 billion, that Buhari was appointing only people from one section against the other, just being excluded. The jurisdiction of the court is expressly removed by that section 6, subsection 6C. So we did all the other benefits of the citizen in the social contract. I'm talking about force majeure. The constitution is the social contract. That union agreement is the social contract. And like every other contract, if something changes fundamentally that makes it impossible for that contract to carry through, any party can declare a force majeure. It's a standard, part of every important contract. How much more the most important of all contracts, the social contract. And so that force majeure is coming from that, perspective of the basis of our union, the basis of our union agreement having been destroyed by parties to that union agreement. The ones who took us away from being a federation and the ones who took us away from being a secular state. Now the owners of the sovereignty, the constituent components of Nigeria, 75% in terms of landmass of South and Middle Belt, more than 90% in terms of human material resources, are the ones we have aggregated. It doesn't, until it goes to referendum, we are not prepared to listen to side talk of those who say, come, trust us, let us be the one to go to government house and now begin to do it. Because we challenge them to say, what is your plan about this matter of responsibility to citizens that is removed in black and white? What are you going to do about the appropriation provision that gives in section 81? The president can actually evacuate everything in the treasury without any recourse to anybody because of the way it was drafted. Say he had to go and get permission from National Assembly to spend money. But that's why they are debating. Section 82 said he's at liberty to run government spending money. And all he needs to do, of course, subject to 50% of what was approved the previous year. Every time you hear about a jumbo budget, it is because they are all trying to take advantage of that to earn, to bring it. And then, because of that provision, they're able to take up to 50% of the jumbo fee. Primary schools have been built beyond the one you attended in your village. How many new health centers have been built? But look at the tall buildings that are springing up in Ikoyi, and they think that the owners of the resources and Abuja do not know where the monies are coming from. Then you come to the governors have the same provisions in section 121 and 122, meaning that all the contents of the treasury can be taken by the 37 men who are president and 36 governors. Then section 308 gives them immunity. What will any leader, what will any hue of leader, any knowledgeable leader, any compassionate leader do with all this kind of thing? What are they going to do with 36 states? How are they going to recur the question of some local government area?
Okay.
And then because
Mr. Nnadi, just hold on.
So the title is a fraud and a scam, and the owners of the sovereignty are the ones talking to everybody now.
Okay.
Can we stop and fix it? Otherwise, unilateral actions are going to overtake everybody. People are being killed in such numbers that you can't imagine.
Okay, just hold on a moment, Mr. Nnadi, just a moment, right? Because we intend to foster a better understanding, particularly for the sake of the audience. Now, we've used the term force majeure a lot in this conversation. Now, there are people in the audience who don't understand what the legal term means. So, as simple as possible, could you explain what you mean when you say you've proclaimed a force majeure?
It is simply a declaration of an emergency. A declaration of an emergency in the manner that we are going to suspend the obligation of obedience to that constitution. That is what it means. When after all efforts to get everybody to come to sit down to agree that we can't continue like this, because the house, when it collapses, it will kill us. It's already killing us in the poverty that is grinding millions of people to death. In the killings that are happening to them in circumstances that are that are enabled by that constitution. So you see, it is just a question of declaring an emergency, standing on our sovereignties, standing on our right to decide how we live on that. If you want to understand the question of sovereignty or how it connects with the constitution to found this kind of action, section 14.2a, as bad as that constitution is, section 14.2a, acknowledges and declares, and I'm quoting, says, sovereignty belongs to the people, from whom government, through this constitution, derives all its powers and authority. I repeat, sovereignty belongs to the people, from whom government, through this constitution, derives all its powers and authority. That simply means that sovereignty, that it is on account of their sovereignty that they are going to make any instrument called constitution. But did that happen in 1999? The answer is no. And the proof of it is in decree number 24 of 1999 that is printed along with that constitution that shows that they were never called into any meeting. So it is the owners of those sovereignties that are supposed to have made that constitution that have now come forward to say, look, our life, is now to be taken from us. Our assets have been taken a long time ago. But we are being slaughtered
just a moment. I'll come back to you very quickly. Tolani, are you there? So that we can get a different legal perspective on the matter.
Yes,
for the sake
of here.
Understanding. All right, Tolani, could you please also tell us from a legal point of view what the term force majeure means, and of course, if there is indeed such a provision in the Nigerian Constitution?
Okay, so force majeure basically means like there's a superior force. So this is me just explaining legal terminology, right? So basically, it's usually a provision in a contract. Excuse me?
Go ahead, Tolani.
Okay, so basically, it's a provision in a contract that relieves you of an obligation to fulfill a part of that contract. So what it usually means is that the contract is binding. Number one, that's the important thing to know. But then there's a clause to say that, in the event of a force majeure, you will not hold me liable for not performing my obligations under this contract, right? It does not necessarily, I don't know how to say this. So the reason why I would not agree with Mr. Tony Nnadi is because we are saying that the Constitution is fraud. But in this case, a contract, there must be a binding contract to be able to trigger a force majeure clause. And there must be a force majeure clause in that contract. Unfortunately for us in our Constitution, we don't have a force majeure clause. our constitution, what we are saying, or I mean, everybody would agree to an extent, is that the constitution itself is flawed. So there's a bit of disparity there, because maybe the terminology might be wrong, especially because the constitution is flawed from the scratch, and that's number one. The second thing is that there is no force majeure, there's no superior force, so to speak. That's how simple. I don't know how simplest I can break it down. So I mean, I agree with a lot of the things Mr. Tony is saying. I'm just saying maybe the terminology is probably not the right one to use, because I personally have never heard of the constitutional force majeure. I've heard of force majeure clauses in contracts, which we don't have in our constitution. So for you to be able to trigger a force majeure, it must be in the contract, which we don't have in the constitution. I don't know if I've answered your question.
Oh, yes, you have. Thank you very much, Tolani. Let me just bring in Professor Pat Utomi back into the conversation. Now, Professor Pat, Mr. Nnadi, I'll come back to you shortly, just a moment. Now, Professor Pat, you would see that across the nation, there is a wave of secessionist calls, particularly amongst the different regions that make the country. Now, some persons have said that these calls is basically an expression, of their frustration with the governance system in the country. It hasn't delivered the goods for the people. They've not enjoyed the dividends of democracy, right? And then they've also, some people also say that it means that they've lost faith with political persons who are proposing, engagements with the governance system that we have today. Now, as someone who has held very senior position at the highest level of government before, what do you say to all of this? Particularly, the charge that the process of governance in the country has failed the people.
Well, I share the view that these expressions of frustration come as a result of poor governance. People find different ways of making their input into a system. And when they find that their input is not processed, cannot be processed, or just totally ignored by the system, then they look for ways that they can get the attention of the system. And bear in mind that a very strange phenomenon has kind of evolved in Nigerian politics, that is, the more obnoxious you are, the more you are listened to. And so people then choose to be as aggressive as possible, because that seems to be the only way you then get a chance to get quote unquote pacified. And so, we won't do the right thing, but these people are about to, they're threatening, okay, give them something so they can keep quiet. That's the kind of phenomenon that the kind of bureaucratic prebendal culture that we have built up in Nigeria, everybody trying to get a share of something, obtain a prebend from the master, who then plays games between everyone to ensure that he continues to be in power. When you can't find any other way to raise your voice properly, you then decide, I'm going to throw a tantrum. And so the phenomenon of throwing tantrums has become the way of helping your voice to get above the noise. Stephen Covey, in his 8 Habits, which he considers the habit of the 21st century, helping people find their voice. And people are struggling to raise their voice, and they're just considered, some part of a floss psalm or jet psalm or whatever it is. Then they decide, okay, I need to be heard. My rights are being trampled. Everything, I need to be heard. And then he threw a big tantrum. And then everybody said, before he destroys everything in this room, give him some toys. And then, so that's kind of a metaphor you could, raise for public engagement in Nigeria, unfortunately. And this has been very costly as a way of raising the voice.
Right. Yeah. As a follow-up question to that, now you are proposing a set of ideas that the people should follow, and you've been doing this for years. If I'm correct. Now you've held office before, right? And now you've been agitating or you're making these proposals for many years. But some persons would say that the country has gotten progressively worse. So why should they listen to you any longer?
Oh well, check the alternative. In the last 40 years, people say, "Oh, well, why bother? You've been shouting, and you've been talking, you've been working, and so why bother? But if you don't bother, you do exactly what has got us where we are. It is because of why bother that we vacated the space for it to be occupied by people who should never have been near public life. And what's the consequence? Where we are today. So, people can choose whatever they want, but they will get the consequence they deserve. And we are where we are because we have not bothered enough. I think people should just ask themselves how much worse it could have been if some people like Gani Fahimi did not, keep shouting. The truth of the matter is that one of the benefits of bothering is that the institutions evolve as a result of the bother. And ultimately, what sustains progress is the boundaries that institutions erect. And people therefore try to be within those boundaries. If Chief Gani Fahimi had not gone to court several times on several issues, we would not have some of the institutional boundaries that we have around many things. And that's why it's an evolution. Things evolve as a result of, no, we can't continue doing it like this, and people are saying we can't. And then we yield, and that becomes a way we do things, a better way. So I'm not exhausted by, the fact that things have continued not to be the ideal that we desire through the years. Some people would like you to be exhausted, actually, to be exasperated and to vacate the space so that they can increase the reign of impunity. Very sadly.
Yeah, but Prof, some people would say that it's not about shouting, but rather about what exactly are you saying. So there are people now who have risen up to say that we have to tear up the entire political system and halt every single process in the country to reconsider, the union itself. Why do you think that your own ideas, is superior to that, or perhaps present a much more workable alternative?
Well, let me see that other process work. I'm willing to yield to superior logic if that process results in something better. I just fear that the prediction that we will descend into anarchy would profit from some of those ways. And I'm not so sure that, tearing down necessarily result in better. Whatever works, works, and that's what's important. If that other way turns out to work, fair enough, fine. But I just suspect from my experience that it will just be more costly without getting the results we all desire.
Right. Thank you for your submission, Prof. I will go to Johnny very quickly. So, Johnny, I understand that you have some alliance with Minas. Now, you heard the definition of force majeure that Tolani, who is an experienced legal practitioner, gave us. Do you have any disagreements to that?
Yes, I disagree.
And, you're going to have to speak louder, Johnny.
Oh, yes. Thank you very much. Can you hear me better?
Yes, please go ahead.
Good. I have a disagreement with that, but also we have do that better justice than Tony Nnadi himself. But I can tell you this, that the force majeure is based on our agreement when we started the union. 3 regions going to Lancaster House, people going to Lancaster House, deciding that we were going to be a federation. That everything that we agreed before we started the union, Nigeria, that went into independence in 1960, that what we agreed back then is not what we are seeing today. And that's hence the force majeure. That is where I understand it. That is how I understand it, because you remember how we were the regions, and then that went into independence, and then as well as with 3 constitutions, and then 1 central constitution that became the national constitution, 4 constitutions in 1960, that became 5 constitutions in 1963, when the Midwest was carved out of the West, and then we proceeded to 66 when there was a coup, and then the military took over, and then we saw the outcome of the war, where a rogue federal government emerged. The military emerged, pretending to be the owners of the land, seized everybody's assets. So we have progressively come to a point where in 2021, what we are seeing today does not even resemble what we started with in 1960. But I will refer to Tony Nnadi to complete that. Thank you.
All right, just hold on before Mr. Nnadi completes the thoughts. Let me just take a couple of questions from the audience. And Mr. Nnadi, I would like you to respond first to the questions we have from audience. We have a lot of them actually. So Awal, please could you read out one of the questions so that Mr. Nnadi can respond very quickly.
Oh, okay, thank you. So this is from Mr.
Awal, please speak louder.
Oh, can you hear me now? Is it better now?
Yeah, it's better now.
Okay, thank you very much, P. Thank you for the good work you're doing. So this is from Mr. Musa for the gate, and he apparently asked 3 questions, but we'll be taking them one by one. This is the first one. It says, I have 3 questions for both speakers. So the first one is, who among the Southern presidential hopefuls in Nigeria today can come 2023 solve terrorism without protecting the interest of the North as regards open grazing, almajiri, and access to land and federal resources? Let me take that again. Who among the Southern presidential hopefuls in Nigeria today can come 2023 solve terrorism without protecting the interest of the North as regards open grazing, almajiri, and access to land and federal resources? Thank you, Peter. Over to you.
All right, Mr. Nnadi, please go ahead and answer the question.
Anybody who is still discussing who will be president is like asking me who is the better person to preside over this robbery enterprise and be fair among the Confederates, the ones confiscating everybody's assets and sharing in Abuja. It doesn't make any sense to me. I'm surprised that people are still asking that kind of question in the face of the constitution that has guaranteed that killings can only continue, that poverty can only be deepened, that impunity can only grow. So anybody who comes is just going to, things are only bound to get worse. And people are on the verge of self-help. People are on the verge of, people who are being slaughtered are on the verge of self-help. People whose assets have been detained for too long and the environment despoiled are on the verge of self-help. People who have tried to flee the country but are being rejected in the very many parts of, there's now a human organ market that is fed by the number of young Nigerian people trying to get away from Nigeria, all the way from Libya to Asia and elsewhere. Those people, some of them are coming back. They prefer to come to die here, and they are going to resort to self-help. If those who are being addressed, for us to please stop and fix these matters. We have not asked them to leave government house. We are saying we can agree we have a problem. The building is about to collapse on all of us. They will be fools to just allow it to happen. There are people who are stepping towards our space with guns. They came from Mali, they came from Senegal, they came from Nigeria, Chad. They are kinsmen with our president. Our president is grand patron, life grand patron of the Mietiala that is taking responsibility proudly for the killing exploits of Fulani herdsmen that have been designated fourth most deadly terror group on earth. Yet, our president goes to the treasury to take 100 billion naira to hand over to that Mietiala. How am I supposed to make a distinction between Fulani herdsmen, the Mietiala, and their grand patron who happens to be my president and commander-in-chief that should have been leading me in that fight to defend myself from people who are invading my space? Those who are discussing about the election in 2023 and who might be the better candidates to preside over the rape of the union should tell us what will happen before that, between now and that time, about the people who are already in our spaces killing people, the assets that are detained, that poverty is increasing exponentially, that farmers could not go to their farm because of people who have what looks like protection of government. If we go by what General Juma told us about collusion, that the farmers who could not go to farm because some people are preventing them, now hunger will come to join that poverty that is growing. Those who have fixed salaries, we can see what has happened to the Naira. And less food will be available because the famine did not happen. These are the issues that are a lot more pressing than who will come to take over the management of the fraud that goes by the name Nigeria. Let us accept we have a dispute that goes to the foundation of the project itself. If you have people like me, and you can see that, if you listen in between the lines, you can be sure that these are not people who don't have anything else they could have been doing for themselves. Amongst the lawyers in the land, I have my space. Amongst those who are in the oil industry, I will always have my space. Even if I choose to leave this Nigeria at this moment, I can practice law very gainfully in more than 56 countries of the world. But we're here saying that the UN is saying that Nigeria, under the constitution that we're using to run that democracy, has become a danger to the global community because the global terror networks are converging in our space. And if 200 million people were to get into trouble because their union snaps, and this union is bound to snap, because there are people who are going to do whatever it takes to stop the pretense that we have a democracy. Except the definition of democracy has changed for your country. Democracy, I know, is government of the people, by the people, for the people. It means three distinct things. Government of the people means that the people, make the supreme rules, which is the constitution. Government by the people means that only your vote can get people to government house. For the people means that those who with government power are doing so, to your benefit, because you set the rules. In Nigeria, as we have it now, we did not set the rules. Our votes never get anybody anywhere because there's a centralized electoral system in which people who do not wish you well are the only ones who have exclusive control of processing candidates for you in election. So if they confront you with candidates that are between armed robber, arsonists, ritualists as the only candidates you are going to have, that's what you get. Even if you manage to smuggle somebody from somewhere, they get in Nemo. So these are all the things that are coming together to choke 150 million people. We're not talking about marginal situation here.
Okay,
and we're saying, let us accept it is not election that will resolve this matter. If we do like doctors who do diagnosis, what is wrong with us? Prescription. What do we do about it? Treatment. How do we go about doing that thing when we can still save this situation? None of this is going on now, and people are still discussing who will go to election.
Okay, I'll come back to you in a moment, Mr. Nnadi, because we have another question for you on your proclamation. That is Nina's proclamation, to be clear. Now, Prof, I have a question for you, Prof, from a member of the audience. It goes by the name Michael, and he's asking to say, taking a look at Ethiopia, I think he's referring to the Ethiopia-Tigray crisis. He said, with all they've tried to solve these issues, which to a large extent we share, is it time for us to accept the reality of what Nigeria is to forestall the coming collapse, or do we keep hoping for a miraculous intervention? That's for you, Prof.
Well, I mean, people are entitled to different visions of the future, and it can be a legitimate position to hold on to any of the many possible visions. But I choose to think that we leaders are appropriately committed to the service of a shared humanity, that it is possible for leaders to engage in a manner that extends an umbrella for the good of all who are human within that space. There are those who say it is not possible, we cannot do it, so let's all head in our different directions. There's no position that is illegitimate. The point for me is that my preferred position creates a greater opportunity for all. I mean, take the Tigray situation. For generations, people lived in those same areas, loyal to one king, an emperor, and they lived maybe not in the most happy way, but they lived okay, they accommodated each other, and they functioned. Then people failed to exercise leadership. I was in Sochi in Russia 2 years ago, shortly after the Prime Minister of Ethiopia was announced winner of the Nobel Peace Prize that year. And he was there, we all went, congratulated him and all of that. And we all had hope that the template on which he rose to the premiership in Ethiopia was one that provided the basis for a strong, binding kind of approach to leadership. And it pleasantly surprised me because I know that something in the culture makes them very quarrelsome around that part and not accommodating. I recall the Europe-Africa Summit of 1996. I mean, a comment about, people can accommodate each other. I know how angry it made an Ethiopian minister who was at that summit in Annecy in France. So they tend to be very, so I was so pleased to see the Prime Minister take a position that literally won him Nobel Peace Prize from nothing. And a couple of years later, that failure to exercise leadership, see the cost, the consequence for everybody in that region, you know. So I believe that it's a choice. And people can choose to have visionary, mature leadership that solve problems and elevate people from the base of being people who care just about themselves, so-called idiots in Greek hierarchy, past the tribesmen who see everybody that is different as the enemy, to one in which people respect their shared humanity and can collaborate to build for everybody's good. That's the level at which I prefer to see humanity where there is leadership. We can atomize, we can keep, coming down until every village becomes a nation state. And not so sure that offers us any greater security or any better prosperity. So it's just different.
Okay. Thank you, Prof. Bonka, I'm told you have some questions.
Yes, I do. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Bonka.
Yes. My question is actually referred to Professor Pat. I think it's a little bit insensitive to say that agitation like this is like kids throwing tantrums. That kind of analogy was very it made us look so, it made us feel like we're just some immature people doing retarded things, and I just felt like it wasn't cool. But I want to say something real quick, and I wanted to kind of engage the professor on it. There's an American, I think it was a president, that said that those who make peaceful change inevitable, they would make violent change. Those who make peaceful change impossible, they will make violent change. I don't remember how I said it, but if yes, something like that. That if you don't allow for peaceful change, there would be a violent change. And so it's like saying the Russians, when they started their revolution, it's like kids throwing tantrums after they've asked and asked so many times that they needed changes, or like the French Revolution, when hunger has pushed those guys to the wall. And so this is a kind of environment where people are being killed, people are being maimed, their lives are being taken, poverty is being extended, and people are saying, okay, we're being pushed to the wall. Enough is enough. So give an opportunity for us to better our lives. And if you don't, there's going to be trouble. That's far from a kid's throwing tantrum analogy. So now, the question that we always ask is that should the cat be put before the horse? And the question I'm asking that is it right to have elections before a right constitution, or should there be the right constitution and then the elections to protect that constitution? The civil rights movement in America, blacks were elected. The blacks were allowed to go for office and things like that. So would it have made sense at that point to tell them that, listen, you don't have to go on the streets, you don't have to agitate, just mobilize yourself and get involved in the electoral process? Would it have gotten them the things they were asking for in the civil rights? During the apartheid regime in South Africa, which I know the professor knows about because I've heard many of his speeches, and you do talk a lot about South Africa. They used to have a colorblind clause. The colorblind clause allows certain blacks to vote, especially those who owned properties. So would it have been wrong for is it wrong to now say people like Mandela and all the guys in the ANC were doing the wrong things when there was an opportunity for them to have participated in elections to have things change, because these are similar situations going on now. In Uganda, would you say an election will remove Museveni with all the things that has been going on with him and the other younger musician guy? I think Bobby something Bobby. So would an election remove that kind of man and pave the way for what the Ugandans really want? So if you look at what happened in Nigeria from 1922 to 1946, there has always been agitations that this constitution does not represent what the people want. Much until NCNC started getting a little bit aggressive with the Enugu coal riots and things like that. And that was when they started giving the constitutions that the people demanded. And that was when people like Awolowo could do what they did in 1950s. That was when people like Zig could build universities. People like Okpara that came after could do the things they needed. So everything they did then, they would never have been able to do it if they're in the constitutions of Clifford or Sir Otto Richards. So should they have just been going into elections then without doing those agitations? Because these are similar aspects of history that Mr. Tony Nnadi is trying to articulate, and he's just being made to look like he's overreacting. So that's right. What I thought to share. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so Prof, please answer Gonga's question.
All right. Well, I think that anybody who looks at my history and suggests that I have something against strong protest or alternative modes of engagement really hasn't seen my history, because all I've done almost all of my life is engage via protest. I was beaten on the streets of Lagos as a senior executive for protesting during June 12th. And people were wondering, are you crazy? I mean, I remember the late Alex Ibu saying to me at the launch at the British High Commissioners, my friend, you still work for that company, you are doing this. No, I've always protested. My whole history is about the point I'm trying to make with the metaphors that I throw up is pointing to the fact that we have had leadership failure. If we had smart, visionary, mature leaders, we would realize that we can, by engaging each other and talking, actually solve many of the problems that have set us back for development. I think on this very platform, I had even said, look, you guys abroad who are complaining and talk, you want to take the Museveni of, the Kagame option, why not if you are really serious? I have no problems with people talking from New York and anywhere, putting on fatigues and getting into the bush and leading a band of people to try and. So I think it'd be a complete misunderstanding of my approach. And if you realize, when I came on, I said, look, I praised Tony for the consistency with which they've continued these their funds. But I actually used the specific Yoruba adage to say that there are many roads to the market. And that, even going back to the example of Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement in America, one of the things I say fairly repeatedly is that perhaps without Malcolm, there would never have been a Martin. White America may never have listened to Martin Luther King if Malcolm X was not active. And there was quite an understanding of that, if you recall the meeting between Malcolm X and Coretta Scott King when Martin was arrested. Malcolm had that clear understanding that the manner of speaking, the fear of him was what made Martin important. I think it's important to have these things in perspective and just saying that we could have avoided, we can avoid all of these things if we had smart leaders who get together and solve problems. There is, funny enough, one of the examples that I have used may seem like an awkward one, but I've often talked about the fact that there's a phenomenon that is perhaps sometimes even misunderstood that is called the Kaduna Mafia. And that what really it was that there were a number of people who lived around a 2 square mile area who had friends who lived in Ikoyi and Victoria Island. And typically, when Nigeria ran into challenges, they would make phone calls, and between them, they would kind of find solutions. And at some point in history, a journalist, who's a friend of mine actually, in referring to them and their influence, created a name for them, the Kaduna Mafia, and that got reified into a myth of concrete perception of a group of people who acted in certain interests. But it was really an agglomeration of people who could talk to each other and solve fix problems, and which is what leadership is about, and which is what has failed dramatically in recent Nigerian experience, in my view. And I've tried to follow these things through the years. So to suggest that I would in any way think the protests in South Africa were inappropriate is a completely wrong reading of who I am, what I've stood for, because I have sacrificially actually put my life on the line several times in this country. I mean, if you go, if you read the papers, I escaped 2 or 3 assassination attempts from state terror in Nigeria.
Right. Thank you, Prof. So I will just bring in Dawn into the conversation. We'll go back to more questions for Prof, and I'll also get back to Mr. Nnadi on the question regarding Nina's proclamation. Now, Dawn, you are a member of Nina's, if I'm correct. Dawn, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, correct.
Yes, so is it Nina's position that there should be no elections in 2023?
Okay.
Dawn, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, what is Nina's position regarding the 2023 election? If you could answer as quickly as possible, because I have a follow-up question to that.
Okay, Nina's, like Tony had said, the elections is the instrument that fuels the constitution, or the constitutional base or foundational base of the nation. And if we have identified constitutional grievances and sovereignty disputes, and based on that declared a constitutional force majeure, it will not make sense if Ninas was to say that elections should continue, given the fact that it had declared a constitutional force majeure in November 2020. So Nina's position is not boycotting the election, but halting the election to halt the supply of life to the 1999 Constitution.
Okay, so in the event that the election does hold, as it looks likely to, what course of action do you recommend to the people?
Yeah, like you said, but the Nina's position is clear. We are in the process of activating the people to be aware that that election should not hold. You know, let me just quickly give you an instance. Why it looks as if the election is going to hold is because Nigerians have gotten to a point that they have been broken. They have been intimidated. They have been used to this life of trying to dig through the wall, even though we have found ourselves in a situation that it's very clear that we are all heading to perdition. We are all in a situation that this country is going to collapse in our head. We are in a situation that we don't even know when we will be attacked on the roads, slaughtered or something. The security situation is so terrible. The poverty situation is getting so high. So we are almost there. And we have been broken to believe that we can continue to survive like this. So what Ninas is actually trying to do is to wake us up from that state of being that broken state, that state of thinking that nothing can be done, that we should just continue like that, that we should just pray that one miracle falls one day. Ninas is at the position of awakening the people. Like we are declared a process of activating the people power. So we are looking forward to getting the critical mass. And we will not want to assume.
Just a moment, Don, right? So again, you're not answering the question, and it will seem to some people like you're not answering because hello, can you hear me, Don?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, just hold on a moment. So you're not answering the question, and it would seem to some people that you're not answering either because you don't have an answer, because NAS hasn't considered the eventuality properly, or because you haven't thought that far. Now, let me just rephrase as simple as possible. If election holds in 2023, right, what are you recommending to the people? Should they participate or not?
If elections should go ahead to hold.
Yes,
the elections would actually go ahead. The government is not saying, the government did not publicly acknowledge our demands to halt the election. So definitely they are actually planning on holding the elections.
So what do you recommend to the people?
The people should do everything possible to halt the election.
If they are not able to halt the election, what should they do? Should they participate or not? Again, you're not answering the question.
Ninas is not asking anybody.
Can I come in? So we don't take these things out of these things are written, and we are not to come here to tell the enemy what we're going to do next. We said we will reconsider. However that plays out, everybody will see it every day from the time we said it to the time when something or the other happens. It remains our own prerogative to bring out what we do next. So no coming to ask what are you going to do or what will you recommend them to do. In a meeting yesterday, a similar clubhouse meeting, we said to them concerning that same question that if elections go on, only 1,500 people are going to be sworn into one president, his vice, that is governors, 109 senators, 360 House members, cabinet of ministers, state assembly, all of them put together will only come to just about 1,500 people. Now, the lives of over 150 million people, discounting the ones that have seceded from a secular union, are at risk because there are people coming towards them to slaughter them. And the only way those people can get to them is that constitution remains empowering those people and disempowering them from defending themselves. So if they refuse to do the thing that can stop that killing from getting to them, or the other calamities that are coming, in torrents towards them, if they refuse to do it and they go towards election, then they truly deserve to die in any number. They truly deserve to be ruled by cows and treated as slaves. That's what we are saying at this time. But we're satisfied with what we see in those who have been told that this is a choice they can make to remain slaves and get killed, because it's not enough. It's not even, you are not going to be allowed to remain the slave you have always been under this constitution. There are people who have come from across the border to take the land from you. They come from all over the continent. And we saw the governor in Boji that came out to say that Fulani from everywhere belong here. And they are coming to, they are doing ethnic cleansing to take over the land. We can pretend as we like, but that is what is going on. And so those who are going to die, those who will face that AK-47 when it gets to them, are only going to get to that if they allow the political parties to keep dragging them towards election that validates the life of that constitution. So if after all of what we've done, they go with those who say, "Come, let us renew the life of your torment, the life of your misery," it will be their choice. If the AK-47 gets to their space, it won't spare them because they were stupid. It will kill them like it will kill other people. So it's as simple as that. Our plan, what we said we'll do is still there. How we do it remains our own, prerogative to tell ourselves or the public at the appropriate time. I think that's it. I think we should leave it there.
All right, Mr. Nnadi, thank you very much. I'll come back to you with another question. Tolani, you had a question you wanted to ask. Tolani, are you there?
Yes. Yes. I mean, I had a question. Sorry. Mr. Tony, thank you so much for coming to this platform. You know, I mean, I have been in other rooms where you had given a sort of lecture, and that's why we decided let's have something different, because I mean the audience is more or less the same, and we just thought, okay, let's try and spice it up a bit. But so prior to your coming in, I know a lot of us I'm also an agitator, albeit maybe certain things that we had said prior to you coming on Clubhouse I didn't agree with, and I know that people are totally and completely against participating in the electoral process before you came. And I know I always ask that question that, okay, whether or not people vote, the elections will hold, and somebody will be chosen either as president, governor, whatever the position is. Well, I was very happy when you came. That was the first time you came to the Masses Club, and you said, you explained the Nina strategy. And if I borrow from your words, you said that the political parties should close their shop. And for me, that was a bit more enlightening for me, because also because you're a lawyer, you understand that if the elections do hold, a candidate or a president or governor, whatever, will emerge from it. So I was very happy when you came up with a different strategy from what we had been discussing on Clubhouse prior to when you came, which is for the political parties to close shop. And I think that's actually a brilliant idea. But my own question will now be, how do we get them to do that? Because I know that during the NSAS, people were gunned down to protect a bloody toll gate, right? What is at stake is not as much as, or what was at stake at that time is not as much as what is at stake right now, right? So these are the kind of people that we are dealing with. So my question to you is that, how do we get them to do that? What role would you like us to play? Like, what is the plan? As opposed to, it's one thing to have the idea, which I honestly think it's a brilliant idea if it can be pulled through, because then we don't have the options of the Agberos voting for us, and we don't have, the Constitution doesn't say anything about how the number of people that need to vote before the winner can emerge. So my question is asking it, I just needed to put a bit of context. My question is now, how do we achieve that? Because the day I heard you were coming and I saw the topic, it said something about our role. And I said to the people that I'm in the same club with, that and I need to listen to this man. And if he shows me something that I can work with, I'll follow him all through. Right now, my question to you will now be, how do we do that? And what role do you need us to play? Thank you.
Thank you. What will happen, which is in our hand to do, is to say, just say before any other thing. Imagine if we had 2 million young people who connect with this, vision to save their future from this constitution and the people that imposed it and those who have benefited from it from all corners. The first step is to say it loudly, so loud that a Kingsley Moghalu will not turn up to say, come vote me, I will do it. Because you already armed yourself with the, with the information you should have in telling him that even if he becomes president, he's not going to be able to change A, B, C, D. That is the Constitution guarantees corruption beyond his capacity to do anything about. The Constitution, the 36 state structure, is the reason why all the income of Nigeria can no longer pay for bureaucracy now. They've stolen 8.3 trillion from the pension funds to keep patching up. They are borrowing billions of dollars from everywhere to get it to pay the overbloated recurrent expenditure coming from having almost 800 governments in a situation where we had only 4, because the local government was the business of the federating units. Nobody took money from central treasury to finance local government. And so let nobody have the courage to come to tell you, if you vote me, I will do it better, because it's like coming to tell you, I will fetch water with this basket. That constitution is the basket. The dividend of democracy is the water that should come to you. The people who have to fetch that dividend of democracy with that basket are the ones who go to the stream. So the governor goes to the stream, he gets 5 billion in the month end, and then he can spend a quarter of at the tall buildings you see in Ikoyi. And so you tell whoever turns up, the one that want to be senator, say, what are you going to do differently? Have you not been senator since 1999? How has it, changed the provisions that guarantee the impunity we see? How has it changed the provisions that guarantee the lack of electricity or the lack of infrastructure? How is it going to change? Because you become president. So if we say it's a leadership problem, then it will be a matter of how come we have not been lucky to find even one leader. The Constitution guarantees we will not find. The Constitution shuts out all of those who may want to do things differently. But even if they manage to sneak through and come to be, what are they going to do with the structures and the things that are forbidden? Therefore, what we are asking people to do now is to confront those who are doing that preparation. First, imagine if it's all over the place that we are not proceeding to this election, because if we go to it, we're only going to get more of all of what we're trying to reject. And we don't have the luxury of time, because there are people marching towards us to kill us, to take our land. And it is that constitution that empower them. For every day we've not raised this issue, they are operating in full power, coming towards us. We can't challenge them, because the constitution criminalizes us if we try to defend ourselves. You understand? And so it is by saying the church leaders, those who come to call you to say, oh, let us now bring one of our own to go and be president. The church leaders, let those who are time Redeemed Christian Church of God ask Adeboye and the rest of us in that Redeemed, say, what has the Redeemed Church said about? And so we saw Paul Adefarashin's clip that went viral, where he was saying that this constitution that the problem that Nigeria has to deal with is his constitution, not the question of who is in government house. And that Nigeria under that constitution is a scam. And that we should not proceed to another election with that constitution still in place, because we're only matching ourselves to Golgotha. And so, where are the other men of God in the land? Where are the Bishop Tutus amongst the men of God in the land? Or is it only private jets and private universities that their positions are meant for? Let this multitude of people who look up to all these men, because it is the flock that is being killed. It is the flock that is in danger. It is the flock that is being impoverished. What have they said? The Tutu keep quiet when South Africa was in apartheid. What has Oyedepo said? What has Oyakilome said? What has Ibiome and Podako said? What has Njenje said in public? They cannot be saying so. What has the Catholic Bishops' Conference said? They must come public now to say that, because this is a choice of life and death involving everybody that gets killed has somebody that is, some congregation that, what is Kumuyi saying? They have to speak up. What are the lawyers in the land saying concerning this constitution that is the source of the problem? Is it to go and renew the life of that constitution? The political parties, when they turn up, let people begin to tell them. Let it not be only Tony Nnadi Let it not be only Ninas that is saying it. Let all of those who now realize that this is what it is. That's why we're pointing at the specific provisions. Let those lawyers who come to tell you about, human rights. Slaves don't have any human rights. Under this constitution, you are slave. Ask Abakoba what he's saying about this.
Right.
Ask Palata what he's saying about this.
Right.
And all the other people in between. People must. It is just a matter of saying it to the hearing of the whole world. Nigeria was created by proclamation of one person. Proclamation of one person sitting in England. How can the joint proclamation of all of us not be able to overturn what a few people as Supreme Military Council did in 1999 or whenever they did?
Okay, Mr. Nnadi, just a moment. So I'll take one more Nina's question, and then I would go back to Professor Parks with another question. So I would just like to bring Johnny into the conversation. Johnny, you're also a member of Nina's, and someone here has a question for Nina's. His name is Anthony Chokes, and he said, "It seems Nina's only plan is hope on the benevolence of the government to voluntarily yield to their plan. Can you please ask him if he's heard the phrase, power is taken, not given?" So I think this person is trying to ask that. Johnny, are you there?
Let's not waste time on a question that is wrong. The person that asked this question, because it's wasting the time of over 200 people here. The person that asked this question, has he read what we wrote? Are we saying we're waiting? Did we say we're waiting for government? We said if after so time they've not done what they need to do, that the people are going to reconsider. Does he know what it means to reconsider? What does he think we are doing? All the groups that are armed, that we're already fighting, whom we persuaded to keep their guns aside, have we asked them to go and surrender the guns to government when people are coming to kill them? The question is wrong. Let's not waste time on it. Nobody's waiting for government. We say the right we're insisting upon now is anchored on our sovereignty that is inalienable. The right to self-determination. It does not depend on whether federal government agrees or does not agree. The only people we have business with are the people themselves. That's why we're going directly to them, having waited for government. We pay the government only the courtesy of inviting them and giving 90 days for them to come. Instead of coming, they rush to their own chamber of National Assembly. Of course, we told them point blank that no such thing will happen. The governors are in between. So there's no such thing as waiting for government. That question is wrong, and we can invest the time better in what is written. What we wrote is the basis of question that anybody should ask. Anybody who hasn't read it should please go and read it before coming to ask questions based on what is written, not what conjecture comes to their mind.
All right, Mr. Attorney, if you want to answer the question from one of your constituents, I'll just go to Professor now. So Professor Pat, someone here is asking, his name is Toyosi Oyejobi, and he's asking to say that who are these smart people we can put in leadership, and how can it be possible under the current political space we have in Nigeria, and especially under a constitution which is flawed? I believe he's asking this question in response to some of the proposals you made earlier.
Well, at a very early stage in the evolution of our country, we found smart people in the Olos, Ogbaras, Zigs, the Balewas. They worked out certain things that may be imperfect, but they were able to work out accommodation that enabled independence to come. Again, we had troubled times. We found people who were thoughtful enough, in spite of how you may judge some, who offered counsel. They were public servants, civil servants, so they came to be known as super secretaries over there, who enabled us navigate a difficult time in our country's history. It is still possible that today we can get people from every part of the country who are, thoughtful enough, who recognize that leadership is giving ourselves for the advance of the common good, and desire as they reward immortality rather than the biggest house in the neighborhood, and can therefore look at how they expand the space for people rather than what they take away, and therefore constrict the possibilities. I think that those people are all around us. They're not hard to find, and that we can, get such people to collaboratively engage in a way that serves us all better. I look at recent experience of countries that have been challenged and have somehow turned the corner, and I say, if it is possible there, why not here? So really, I mean, if you look at the kind of coalition of people that came together during some of our, let's call them protests, these concerned professionals, these were people who spoke different languages. These are people who clearly understood that what was happening in our country were not the best, and they thought that they could do something to make a difference. And they were able to collaborate, and some consequence came out of their efforts. I just believe in the greater possibilities of the perceptions of the possibilities of the human spirit. That every day we see the triumph of human spirit, and that we can just do personal discipline, elevate ourselves to play at certain levels that can enable our lives have impact. It's just an optimistic vision of life. People can make choices, and I have just made a choice to have an optimistic view of what is possible to the human spirit.
Right, Prof. I'm just going to ask, take another question now that is related to Nigeria's current political structure. So Seb Udiaja sent in this question, and he said, Professor, you said it is all politics and negotiations. You do not deny that it was military junta that imposed both the constitution and the structures. Who will be negotiating with whom in this case? What is the subject of the negotiation where the constitution is pure fraud? Where does the politics start when the structures of the union is utterly skewed? 3 southern regions were given only 17 states, in brackets 51 senators, while 1 northern region was given 19 plus 1 states, in brackets 58 senators. Such a skewed structure imposed upon the peoples. Where does politics and dialogue start if this constitution is not repudiated? That's Budiaja's question to you, Prof.
I'm not a supporter of that constitution. A question is posed as if I support the constitution. I think that the constitution is flawed. I've said that for forever. However, again, this is where rational conversation is very important. To what benefit has it been to whom that you now have so many states, you now have so many local governments in one place or the other? If you look at the outcome, has it improved anything for those who you think have advantage? Certainly not. Indeed, and in truth, the big lesson from all of this, which is why I wish there was public conversation that was rational in our country, is that all that hustling to get more in the hope that it will incline you towards extracting more rent from the system has just led to more poverty for those who seem to have advantage. And if we have, the kind of elevated conversation that we could have, people will realize that this business of trying to get more share of revenues by falsifying population, doing this or that, has only made people poorer rather than giving them advantage. Parts of the country that were very productive in the 60s, but the politics and the game playing of military rule, which allowed a gerrymandering of all kinds of things, produced possibilities of more revenues going to those places. And unfortunately, sadly, in add up, made those places poorer. And the places that seem to have become more disadvantaged in this sharing have become more prosperous. And that's very simple. The logic is there, and there's historic evidence for it. But what makes rich is production and not revenues. So you allocate, quote unquote, and give more revenues to some people. What it produces is a lottery effect. You see a poor guy who has won the lottery, and 5-10 years later, they're poorer than they were before they won the lottery. But if you just invest in your people, your young people, to be able to produce better, they end up being richer. They end up being people of a more edifying existence. And that's what, unfortunately, we have not been able to share with each other and educate each other on, because we are all obsessed with how we can get a bigger share of something that was. Have you ever really thought of this? With all the fussing around oil revenues, Nigerians in the diaspora remit so much more than Nigeria earns from crude oil. Have you thought about that? It just shows you that really this whole prebendal political culture is so wrong-headed. If a few human exports send back more money than all of this earnings from oil, it almost like justifies a flippant comment I made in 1996 in an interview with The Economist. I had said in that interview by Richard Dowden that I wish we could find a way to get together Nigeria's generals and their politician friends and buy them an island somewhere or wherever and give them all of Nigeria's oil if they would just leave Nigeria alone. That I think Nigeria would be much better off. And The Economist, they always have a comment. The Economist said, fair comment. And this was 1996. You look back, and if we managed to do that, Nigeria would be so much, much better off. In fact, there was a time I used to argue that I wish we could cap the wells. Just cap the goddamn oil wells. Nigeria would have been much better off. Unfortunately, people struggling to get a share of what was flowing out of those wells have gotten poorer because they missed the logic of wealth, and that is, it's about production, not about sharing of revenues. I yield.
Thank you very much, Prof. Johnny, are you still there?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm very keen on bringing you into the conversation. I don't know if you're a part of NINA's leadership structure.
The NINA's leadership structure?
Yes. Are you a member of the leadership structure of NINA's as a group?
That question is not appropriate for this forum. If you want to know more about the leadership structure of NINA's, you contact the NINA's secretariat and we'll give you that information.
Okay,
so
you will know why
structure, you know that NINA's has a
right,
president.
so Johnny,
no, I'm coming to you. I'm coming back. I'm coming.
You don't want to answer the question, apparently. So I'll just go on to ask you the question I wanted to ask.
Because there's a point.
Demanding to know what the membership strength of NINAS is. Are you willing to provide that information, or you would not?
The point I'm trying to make is that I want your questions to be channeled. I mean, there was a question you asked me earlier. A lawyer had rendered a legal opinion of something, and you're asking an engineer to counter. I wanted a lawyer to respond to a lawyer's statement earlier regarding force majeure and what it means in the legal, from a legal perspective. And it's not like we don't know what we went into. We understand that there's something wrong with Nigeria. It's not what we agreed. And then when you come to legal, the structure of NINAS, there's a president, there's a secretariat, there's the secretary general who is here with us. And then those are questions you direct to Secretary General of NINAS.
Yes, and I'm asking you because members of your group are demanding that you others join in the conversation besides Mr. Nnadi. But if you will not answer, it's fine. You can mute your mic. I'll go to
okay, I just wanted to make sure that you no.
Yeah, it's all right, Johnny, because we don't have a luxury of time. So I'll just give us to Mr. Nnadi very quickly. Mr. Nnadi, someone is demanding to know the membership strength of NINAS. So I don't know if you're willing to provide that information.
NINAS is a movement. NINAS is a movement made up of several organizations that have three lead organizations for each of the three blocks, into which we have grouped the country for the purpose of engaging this common enemy, being the invaders, the Fulani invaders coming from across the border, which one of them is our president, and the constitution they imposed on us since 1967. Therefore, NINAS is a movement of all those who are in that danger, whether they are in Ibadan or they're in Boni or they're in Jos. So it's not something of it's a movement. The organizations can have all of that, but a movement is not. It's all of us, and as we move around, the day we went to have a press conference, the day we went to have a press conference in Ibadan, I think it was on the 17th of March. We thought we were coming to deal with a certain number of people, but when Ibadan people realized we went down and they came out in their numbers, we didn't have a plan to deal with over 2 million people.
Just hold on a moment. Just hold on a moment. We lost you for a couple of seconds. I'll come back to you if you'd like to provide more answers to the question. Mr. Boshashere is back with us and is back on stage. For those who are not aware, he's a senior advocate of Nigeria and is also the former Attorney General of Lagos State between 2007 and 2011. Mr. Shashere, thank you for joining us again. Are you there, Mr. Shashere?
Can you just tap your mic to unmute if you want to speak? If you can hear.
Mr. Olashukwu Shashere, you have to unmute your mic so that we can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Oh yes, we can hear you now. Thank you for joining us. So I'll just go right straight to the question. So there was a bit of a debate on the term force majeure earlier because NINAS, as a group of indigenous people of Nigeria, proclaimed a constitutional force majeure. Oh, I think we lost Mr. Shashere again. Okay, I'm just going to pen the question until he's able to join us again. So, Mr. Nnadi, you were
before he comes
basically
back,
explaining.
Before he comes back, the lawyer that tried to give
Mr. Nnadi, your network is not at its best tonight. We're really struggling to hear you.
Okay. I say, it's not. Is it better now? Because I changed a little.
I can hear you now. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Mr. Shashere.
Mr. Shashere is back. Mr. Nnadi, just hold on a moment.
Right.
Now, Mr. Shashere, I was asking that there was a debate earlier on the meaning of the term force majeure, because NINAS, as a group of the indigenous people of Nigeria, according to the claims on the group's website, they've proclaimed a constitutional force majeure in the country. And one of their demands is that the federal government should also the conduct of elections under the 1999 Constitution. So we just like if you provide legal clarity on what the term force majeure means, and if there is indeed such an avenue where a group could declare a force majeure on the Nigerian Constitution.
Wow. There are lots of things involved in what you said, and I don't think I can provide legal clarity because this is a very difficult concept. I'm not sure. I did when I was on earlier on. I caught some of the arguments with Prof and Mr. Nnadi, but I didn't hear this proposition. Simply put, force majeure is we now know to be a concept that is not exhaustive, but it also has boundaries. I'm not one of the people who believe that constitutions can be subjected to such simple contractual terms because even though constitutions are based on consent and contracts are based on consent, it's a different type of consent without consideration that is involved in constitution making. But I also think that you need to look into a lot of political history, into history itself, and consider some of the constitutional concepts involved in that statement. How are constitutions made? Historically, how are the constitutions that have been seen to work on the best models, how were they made? How was the original constitution of Nigeria made? And even the Republican constitution that followed that in '63. How do they differ from the 1999 constitution? And the very process of constitution making, if it's complicated at all, and it has its own fiction, and I'll come to that because it's a legal fiction. Constitution making is a legal fiction. If constitution making is a legal fiction, the abrogation or the suspension or the declaration of a force majeure surely has to be a fiction in itself. And in whose authority does that rest? So if you quarrel with the making of a constitution based on a representative constitutive authority, I presume that is saying that combatants came and declared a constitution. If you say that in 1999, combatants promulgated this constitution and therefore it doesn't have the consent of the people, then how are you going to derive the consent that is going to either abrogate or declare the force majeure? So it's going to be very difficult. And in that difficulty rests the answer. The answer is constitution making, like many doctrines, many devices in our traditional common law history, are legal fictions that we acknowledge and we acclaim. We proclaim and we acclaim. And by acclamation and common acclamation, we make them come into existence. What am I saying? If you go, let's talk history, political history, for just a minute. And I'm sorry that this is coming late, and I'm not really au fait with the arguments that have passed before me. So forgive me if I'm speaking out of context. If we talk about some of the best constitutions that have worked, in United States of America, if my memory serves me right, there are about 42 delegates who, first of all, there were a handful of people who wrote the Constitution. Madison, Benjamin, Jefferson, Lafayette, a handful of people who wrote the Constitution. About 42 delegates passed it and needed the nine colonies or the 9 Commonwealth states, as they were called there, to pass them into law. It was a democratic event that brought the American Constitution into being. The same thing with the 1960 Constitution in Nigeria. It was a military constitution because it was passed by the military government of the British. The colonial government was military. And that government then passed it on to their parliament, and they made an act of parliament. That act of parliament then became our constitution. That constitution was what was amended in 1963 to become what we knew as the Republican Constitution, the constitution that we all hold dearly, the one that had regional powers and all the glory that we now reminisce in nostalgia about. So, but the difference is, it's not the process, it's the common acclamation by consent. So the sovereignty, the principle of common sovereignty, the principle of sovereignty belonging to the people is what brings constitutions into life. And that sovereignty is expressed by the common consent. That consent need not be done by physical vote. It sometimes, in fact, most times, is done by delegate or representative vote. And sometimes it's done by a vote that is consented to not physically by actual expression of a vote, but by nod and saying, well, yeah, George Washington, who was a general, has my authority. But there was no poll to count that authority. So you pass that on, and then you come to common acclaim, and the sovereignty then it resides with the people. And the sovereignty is what the people use to hold everybody in check. It isn't the sovereignty that always brings constitutions into life. Now, people are going to attack me for what I'm saying, but I'm telling you that these are legal fictions. You have to understand that they're not absolute concepts. And that's what you need to move beyond the day of creation. There was light. The Lord said, let there be light. After light, let's deal with what has happened after light. So you want to declare a force majeure on the 1999 Constitution. I presume, I don't know the argument, I presume it is based on the lack of common consent. Can we really be saying common consent in light of what we know constitution making involves? How do we cure that common consent? We're going to elect a constitutive assembly, and then that constitutive assembly is now going to go and pass a fresh constitution. How long is that? When are we going to ever get? We have been amending constitutions since 1963. Every time the military comes in and they suspend the constitution and they promulgate amendments, because you cannot be a country without a constitution. You must remember, if it is the ground known, you cannot exist. So I always frown when we say, oh, the 1999 constitution. There's only one constitution. You don't need to name it by the year it was made. There's only one, the constitution. Today we have a constitution. Don't call it 1999. So when the military come, there's a reason why they don't say the constitution is cancelled. They say we suspend the constitution, because a gathering, a society must have a constitution. Otherwise, they're no longer an orderly or civil society. So I don't know. I don't know if I've rambled out of context, but it's not an easy thing. A declaration of force majeure based on common consent. So I'm sorry. This is nice.
Thank you, Mr. Shashere. So one more question before we go back to Mr. Nnadi. So oftentimes, when groups that are agitating for self-determination in Nigeria make their propositions, there is always an appeal, a specific appeal to the United Nations, right? And they often make the appeal based on the understanding that the United Nations has an obligation to perhaps seriously consider such request. Legally speaking, I mean, with the concept of international law and diplomacy, do you think that the UN has such powers to help to further the agenda of self-determination or self-determined groups or groups seeking self-determination in this regard?
Well, self-determination is a human right. It's a universal human right that is the very foundation of our international relationships today. So, but you see, self-determination must always be considered in the context of the municipality in which it.
Oh, I think we lost the Shasha, right?
Yeah.
So,
P.
Yes.
So when Mr. Shasha, when he gets back into the room, I think we should let Mr. Nnadi talk about constitutional force majeure, and maybe I should also provide the context as to what led to the debate. I think it'll be easier to drive it home. I feel like the terminology might not be correct to say a constitutional force majeure based on my law of contracts, right? And how force majeure works. And then, but I think Mr. Tony should also shed a bit more light to it, since he's also a lawyer. And then Mr. Shashiri I think it'll be easier to drive it home when he gets the context of the debate.
Right.
If you agree.
We can just discuss it briefly. Mr. Nnadi, I have another question for you from somebody in the audience. Now, the person says that let's imagine a scenario where you get your wish and somehow the government halts the elections, right? So the person is saying, so what next? Does it now mean that President Buhari will remain in charge up until the time when the issues are resolved?
If the person, which is why in the days ahead, we might have to devise a way of making sure, and I've said this a number of times, whoever is going to ask a question, because the question can actually now put words in our mouth which we didn't speak, for a document that has been in the public space in December of 2020. And just a few paragraphs, those specific demands that has in black and white what we said need to be done. We say we will have to go into a transition negotiated by the owners of the land, so that we can have governance, some nominal governance still in place, built around the existing governance structures. And so we determine at the center, what do we have to adjust for this transitional period? We're not asking anybody to leave government house at all. For the states, what do we have to adjust? In the National Assembly, how do we adjust their mandate so that the body with constituent powers can go in full? They can't be sitting and talking to us about medium term and long term, contracting more and more loans of billions of dollars on our behalf with full powers, taken from that constitution. Because the dispute we have raised is about our signature that has been, fraudulently procured as validation for that constitution. I wish Mr. Secretary was, listening now, so that I can tell him that it is the question of implanting our signature in circumstances that are clearly a forgery because of the content of their own decree number 24. If they impose that constitution on account of military, imprimatur, that is to say, well, we're in charge now. By decree, we say this is the constitution. That's a different ballgame. They turn around to say, I and you, having met and solemnly resolved to live together forever, inseparable, have agreed to submit our lands and our people into this union. That is what we are contest. That is the angle from which we are coming at it, to say you cannot claim. My quarrel would have been different if, as my conqueror, you, General Washington, say this is the constitution. It's the few of us who won that war that have dictated this constitution. That's a different ballgame. But this one is, you put my signature as the one who signed off. And if I talk about forgery now, some will begin to argue, about the definition of forgery is simply every time, a document, purports to come from where it did not come from, and you have a means of showing it is so. On this occasion, it says we wrote and agreed upon, and then wrote and enacted. And there is proof that we never met because of the content of decree number 24 that was printed in error. along with the constitution, because the instruction written in that decree is that it should not be printed, so that we don't get to know how it came about. The constitution will have started with we the people, a plain lie. So when we talk about force majeure, it is to say, except somebody can argue that the constitution is no longer a social contract, except somebody will argue that what we agreed as the basis of the social contract at the beginning, assuming we even remove all the dates from all the that constitution simply means to constitute. Bring your part, I bring my part, and it becomes the whole. So if we constituted on the basis of being a federation and on the basis of being a secular union, and suddenly in that social contract, it had turned into non-federation, non-secular union, and we declare an emergency because it's on account of our sovereignty that we are constituted, your land, my land. And all of us who own those lands, who are now being slaughtered on that land, having been expropriated by that forgery. These are all the things that are, coming together to sustain that declaration of emergency around that social contract. It doesn't have to be written into that forgery, because somebody may say, is it written in the constitution? Is there some provision for it? Like asking Mandela and Oliver Tambo whether there's a provision in our apartheid constitution for them to reject a minority white rule that was the purpose of the constitution itself. And right. So it is in the context of a radical departure from the basis of our being together, bringing our lands and our people into a union. That we are saying that basis had been damaged by the actions of a section of the country that has now brought us to where we have been impoverished and expropriated and now being killed. We can't sit here. The other alternative will be self-help, indiscriminate self-help. Nobody is going to endure killing. You can endure poverty. You can endure some maltreatment or marginalization. But when it comes to killing, I tell you, nobody's going to enjoy it.
Okay, just a moment, Mr. Nnadi. Yeah, just a moment. So Tolani, Mr. Shashere is back in the room. So I think that Mr. Tony has also provided a bit of context. Yeah. Oh, he's out again. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I think he's having a network challenge. I'll just go to Professor Pat very quickly because we have some people who have questions for the Prof.
Yes,
Prof,
I'd like to also encourage a summary. I have to be on. We're at 5 a.m. and I've been now at this.
Right. Thank you so much for the time you've spent so far. I mean, we've been going on for hours now, and I think this perhaps should be the concluding question.
Pete, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Olab.
Before Prof goes, Prof, thank you very much. Prof, by the way, you owe me something, don't you? Remember? I think I owe you a power bank, and you owe me something. You owe me a guest.
Okay.
So when are we getting it?
If I I'll work on it.
Okay. I would love to have it, especially when we talk about sustainability in the educational sector. Thank you.
Right.
Okay. Johnny, I just want you to ask the question you wanted to pose to Prof. Very quickly, if you're still there.
Professor Utomi.
Yes, sir.
This is my question for you. I read an interview that you did some years ago about your experience in the North on the day the program started, the slaughter of Igbos and other Southeasterners in the North.
Okay.
You were a young man there, and that interview was quite intriguing. I mean, that your experience was harrowing, and I still think about it a lot. And you recounted your experience, how your father was very well placed and was working in the North at the time, and there was this his personal contacts and relationships that he built over there helped keep you alive because your friends came up, family friends, and they did their very best to make sure that you were safe. And then I recall when you were in that plane to fly out of the airport, I'm not sure which airport that was. Can you please?
So the aerodrome in
The
Guzo,
old drum, yes. Yes.
today's Kwara State capital.
Okay, Kwara State capital. Which one?
Zamfara, today.
Zamfara State capital. Okay. Yeah. Yes, I recollect how you described that experience. You were in that plane, and that plane was getting on the, there were Igbos and other Southeasterners everywhere in that airport, and they all wanted to catch that one plane. Mm. You were inside that plane, and as that plane went to taxi it on the runway,
people were running
outside. They were running after the plane. People who did not get a seat were running after the plane on the runway. Mm. And this time I think about that image, I choke up, because that was the experience of hundreds of thousands of our people who perished in the north. And these were even the ones who could afford to fly out of the north. There were so many others who could not go to airports. They went by road. Many were killed on the road. Many were killed at rail stations. And that was the Igbo experience in 1966 in northern Nigeria. You have those deep personal relationships in the north, and that's not a bad thing at all. But is it possible that your outlook and the way that you see Nigeria may not be the same way others, that so many people, that's in terms of as it relates to the north, not north as in middle belt or anything, I mean that far north, that north that you had built relationships with, that was close, I mean that was close enough to your family to where that friendship could bring your family to safety when others died. Could that be, would you say that, I mean, could that be, do you really think that, I mean, do you really feel that you have the right pulse of how people who have borne the brunt of the calamity Nigeria has become? I mean, would you say that you really understand why people may want to disengage from that Sharia belt that has caused so much pain in their lives? Are those relationships so strong that you can't really take definite a strong stand against that Nigeria that many of us have think it's really that has become dangerous to the most of us? Are those relationships that I mean, would you say that your relationship and the way your outlook and your view of Nigeria is based not on what many of us have had to deal with as per that Nigeria, but on your much better, cozier personal relationship with the North? Thank you.
Well, thank you. Every individual's experience is idiosyncratic. It's going to vary from others, but I don't think that is necessarily a spin in the direction of cozy relationships. I think you could even take the same comment or the same example, experience, and turn it on its head and say, isn't that a reason why you should be even more bitter because of what you have experienced? The 1966 experience, my father worked for British Petroleum back in those days, BP. We moved around the deep north. As a child, I knew almost every part of northern Nigeria. As I like to tell my story, I was born in Kaduna. I was baptized in Jos. I lived in Maiduguri as an infant. I started school in Kano, and the bulk of the rest of my primary education was in Guzo. And when the pogrom started, I had just arrived in Guzo. The morning the program started actually by train. And as it continued, people were running to different places for safety. On that morning, the very morning of that Sunday of, I think it's May 9th or so, or 30th, 1966, before I arrived, when I was on the train, returning to Guzau, my family had gone to church. When the mobs invaded the church, my mother's hand was broken. My mother, long story, right inside the church during the course of the mass, that the invasion took place. Because the hospitals were not safe, the best recourse that my father had was to drive the family to the home of a friend of his, who was the local Barclays Bank manager, a northerner who would later become a minister of information, Garba Wushishi. But at that time, he was the manager of Barclays Bank in Guzau. And a doctor came to attend to my mother in his home, and then he came to the train station to get me. And when I was getting out of the train, everyone was deserted, and I looked, I didn't see my father or anybody until I looked across on the road. There was my father standing beside his Peugeot 404, and carrying a gun. And I wondered, was he going hunting this morning or something? And like Rambo, he had this with bullets, chain or whatever around his one. And anyway, he waved me over, and I came and we got in the car, and then we drove to Malam Garba Wushishi's home. And then the story began to unfold. Then the riots got worse in the night, and everybody had to run somewhere. First, we ran to the hospital, the Catholic hospital run by the nuns, which was on the way to the airport or aerodrome, as it was back in those days in Guzau. And then the Reverend sisters were not quite sure what they could continue to harbor people. So moved to the airport. And my father had managed to make contact with his employers, who then sent a light aircraft to come and get us. And that, what you described, took place as we were being flown out in that aircraft, and others were desperate and kind of like, anyhow, that could have been the basis for bitterness, that kind of experience. In fact, it gets worse because my father, when we flew out into the plane, brought us out to Kaduna, and then we continued back east, and my father continued work, returned to Kano, and operated from out of Kano. And something even more dramatic happened, because he then was traveling around as part of his work, and the worst of the what do you call it now, pogrom, rioting, whatever, heat. He was in Maiduguri, I think, at that time, and had to hide inside a tank, in a tank farm, newly built, no petrol inside it. He had to hide inside it, and imagine the scorching sun. Actually, back home in my hometown, I mean, we waited for news for him for weeks and weeks, and at the point he was presumed dead, we assumed that he had been killed. In fact, the day my father showed up, we had to go through the ritual of throwing sand at him, which is what you do to somebody who has died or presumed dead and shows up. So my experience could have led me to bitterness. But contrary to that, I did not, even my personal experience, if you want to add, gets even more dramatic. The Civil War starts. I experienced the massacres in Asaba. I actually, at the point in time, was lined up to be shot, because the way the Asaba massacres took place was you know, they said men on this line, women on this line. They basically shot the men, and we were lined up with men. I was from one or two from two students at a time, and an officer just came in before some city corporal was about to do that, and said to him, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And had him arrested. Actually slapped him, and that's how I escaped being shot there. And as it all turned out, by the way, my father had then been transferred to Lagos by BP. So he was working in Lagos while we were in the war on the Biafran side, inside. And this colonel who then rescued us, Lieutenant Colonel Nathaniel Nasamu, turned out to be a friend of my father's. And that's how my civil war ended, because I then headed to Lagos and then continued school in Ibadan. So from 1968, I was in school in Ibadan till the end of the Civil War. And so I can tell the story of the Civil War from inside Biafra and from deep inside Nigeria, where nobody actually, besides the advertisement on television, go on with one Nigeria. We didn't know we were partying and didn't know what the war was about. So I have a kind of whole experience of these things. And it's just a personal choice not to be bitter. It wasn't about deep relationships. It's about always asking myself, humanity is flawed. Is there a way that the fact that we were created, co-creators with God, and to advance humanity towards its perfection, is there house to house in the part of the north where he was at the time, in that period of killing Igbos, fishing them out and killing them wherever they ran to, wearing Nigerian army uniform. Then he turns up in 2021 to say to the same people, or in 2020, as he became president again, to say to the same people, I will speak to you in the language you understand. To say to the same people who were, quarantined into a 360-degree encirclement just for the purpose of annihilation. And the issues have not been addressed nor settled. But the same human beings who saw to these killings in these numbers, presiding over the loot from that war, as Nigeria is now booty. Nigeria has been booty to them, nothing else. The constitution we have on the table today is the title deed covering that booty. Right. And those same people are the ones telling us to our faces that the matter is non-negotiable. Talking about humanity, I've been to places myself. I went to South Africa when Henry Oka was being tried. I spoke to that judge 2 hours, 35 minutes, faced by 53 cameras, CNN, Al Jazeera, and all of that. That was the day Nigeria perished in the thought of the international community, because I did challenge South Africa with their history in a manner that even the judge, who was obviously a white judge, who was obviously older than me, he said to me, Mr. Nnadi, you've taught us history, you've taught us geography, you've taught us mathematics. Please, all of what we have done in this trial had been turned upside down. What do you say you want me to do to end this matter? I say, release this fellow to me. Henry Oka was standing less than 6 meters away from where I was standing in courtroom in Johannesburg. I didn't know that I was, and the judge was ready to do that. He was ready to do that. He only called the two lawyers to chambers to say, look, I want both of you to agree so that nobody, because I told him that he had a flexible, that the punishment for the offense as framed
that he had room to maneuver for the length of time they've held him to say, well, that's the length of punishment. He could give 2 years or 3 years. 2013 for somebody who was arrested in 2010 for something he knew nothing, absolutely nothing about. The bombing that happened on October 1st Independence Day parade. And so, as I was speaking, I did not know that those TV cameras that faced me were beaming live across the globe. And the whole of South Africa, the young people, because I was telling them, I was discussing the principles of apartheid and how it played out and who was arrested, before which judge they were taken. I knew their names and what each of those judges said up to Rivonia trials. Young South Africans had never heard the story of their country that raw, but they heard it that day and they came out to the street. I could not leave that courtroom from the front door because of the number of people that had gathered. It was like that in Pretoria, it was like that in Durban, it was like that in Cape Town, and all over the country. And because I was looking at it was their same humanity, but I was comparing what we were in on that, what the Fulani was doing compared with what the Boers were doing. I had that map that was broken into 4 on display at the permission of the judge. And I've also been to other crimes. I've been in the Senate on Capitol Hill discussing with those who were at war with ISIS in the Middle East. And I'm saying that all of this put together, there's no humanity that will accept that your neighbor owes it a duty of faith to kill you as infidel and you remain in that neighborhood. There's none that will accept that all men are not born equal, therefore you are born to be his slave and you and him your master. And so these are the 2 things that have arisen in this union agreement we thought we had settled, which have been overturned by these people, and they have refused to listen to any kind of reason. And we come to where we say we must do something to end that marriage, because the union itself was set up as a marriage between the southern lady of Minsk and the poor, suitor from the north, who were the local agents of the British. If we don't get to the root of this matter and we continue to pretend that Nigeria fell from heaven and not to be adjusted in any way to accommodate the lives of other people, we're not even talking about livelihood or equal rights. We're talking about our very life is now at stake, and nobody can come to tell me that it is election that will solve that problem.
Okay, just a moment, Mr. Nnadi. Yeah, just a moment. I'll come back to you shortly. There's someone on stage who wants to ask you a question. But before we call on the person, I'd just like to take Prof's final submission. He has an early money appointment.
60 million every month.
Mr. Nnadi, just a moment, right?
Yes.
So I will come back to you shortly. There's someone here who has a question for you. But before that, I want to take Prof's final submission, if he has any, because he has an early morning appointment and he's been here for several hours. So, Prof, what's your final submission?
Well, my final submission, if we may call it that, is that if you really read the history of the human race, you will find that man has gone through some very trying times in terms of relationship between men. But that all through that history, very few people of courage have risen above the, if you will, emotions of their experience. In many ways, Nelson Mandela was extraordinary because of the way he could see tomorrow beyond the things that would have been the bitterness of his own condition. And that was a superior tool that he had. And it has earned him immortality in the pantheons of measure of quality of manhood, leadership. I do think that if we have enough people who manage to elevate like that, we can overcome many things that are possible sources of embitterment in the past. I generally like to look more at the future than at the past. I find it important to learn from the past, but not to let the past govern the present. But if a vision of the future can orient us, just like you're driving a car, the big windshield in front exposes you to the future, what's ahead of you. You need a small rear view mirror to see, what's behind you so that you don't have an error of judgment. But what's more important is how you can engage that future so that you can make it a better one than yesterday. I've generally hoped that outlook on life defines how I navigate. And I hope that somehow the promise of a Black nation that can redeem 500 years of the Black as the underclass can emerge. My big fear about the failing of Nigeria as it is going is that if it does fail, I hope not, but if it does fail, it could, doesn't necessarily have to, but it could mean in the usage I choose 1,000 years of servitude for the Black man. And I do hope that people who act, to advance causes across the place would sometimes think about such things and engage differently so that such a future can be seen in the way that it provides dignity to the Black man. I thank you all so much for the evening. I'd like to retire now because I must be up before 5 o'clock in the morning.
Professor Patrick Utomi, thank you so much for participating in this conversation. We're all sincerely grateful. Thank you very much, sir.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So, Professor, Mr. Tony Nnadi, so Priye is on stage and he'd like to ask you a question. So, Priye, you can ask a question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Moderator, and greetings to everybody on stage and greetings to everybody at the audience. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, Priye.
Yes, Mr. Tony Nnadi, looking at structures of NINAS and how it is on a tripod, which is the west, southwest, the middle belt, and the lower Niger Congress, as it is being said. In earlier conversation with you, you said the reasons for the Southwest being the structure of our own is because of the fact that it's a homogeneous community. And the reason why the Middle Belt has a structure within NINAS is a multi-ethnic community. Now, my question is, the Southeast is an homogeneous community like the Southwest. And the South-South is a multi-ethnic community like the Middle Belt. Why is it that the South-South does not have a structure within NINAS? Because from what I see, and I see the map of the Lower Niger Congress, it's no different from the map of Biafra of 1967. And it's the same map that Mozart and IPOP are using. So are you saying that the South does not have the way without to manage our own agitations? Thank you.
The map of Biafra of 1967 was the Midwest any part of that Biafra, any part of Midwest?
The Midwest was not.
Any part of Midwest
was not.
Biafra?
The Midwest was not, but the map we are seeing today includes the Midwest, which is the South-South-Southeast alliance.
What is?
Can I finish, please? Can I finish, please?
You've asked your question. I only asked you, to
yes.
clarify.
Is it a rhetoric question, or should I just?
No, you said this. You said.
Please let him answer. Hold on, Mr. Tony. Hold on, Mr. Tony. Tom P, I'm not doing your work for you, but please let him answer the question. Let's not lose the room at any point. I beg of you. P has been doing an excellent job. Let's not make it hard, please. I beg of you. Mr. Tony, go ahead.
There are two transactions to be done. The monster that is upon all of us, how to take it down is the first transaction. And that is the whole purpose of the alliance. The Nigeria that is holding on to everybody's space has to give up those spaces. And therefore, the next concern will be how do we recover and begin to rebuild those spaces. And all of those who own those spaces, nobody was going to come to Ogoni land to think for Ogoni people. So it is Ogoni people on Ogoni land, Ijo people on Ijo land, Berom people in Berom land in their own area, looking at what the requirements are at the UN for that right that we seek to exercise, that right to self-determination, under which our sovereignty can come back to us. Southeast or South-South does not qualify. Biafra does not qualify. Yoruba qualifies because they are a distinct nationality in their ancestral space. Middle Belt does not qualify as Middle Belt except they have a charter among themselves, and we didn't call them North Central because that was what Nigeria preferred to call them, so that Kaduna can be in the Northwest in their imagination, whereas 2/3 of Kaduna State is in the Middle Belt, and they are Christians, and they are not going to be represented by those in the Northwest. So we pulled away from all of what Nigeria called us and went to the nationalities so that first we organize ourselves in a manner that the international community can relate to what we are saying, because they're not going to give us 300 countries and in the different 300 languages. So to that eastern half of southern Nigeria, we were trying to minimize what we confront the international community with. People can always go by plebiscite to do further things. But if we do not organize something they can relate with, we will have bigger problems. And so for the eastern half of southern Nigeria, we said, everybody stand on your father's plot. Is there any reason is it not the same enemy tormenting all of you? They said yes. Are you willing to go and sit down and do for yourself what Nigeria did not do for any of you all this while? We started with the Oba of Benin that went with them to Aburi. He was the one that took the minutes of Aburi in Benin on the federal side, the late radio. And from there, went to the Oluwari. They did the same, called the leaders of thought, and everybody began to look at what their situation was and what they will want to see if there's going to be something different from what Nigeria, because all the structures from the 27th of May in 1967, when Nigeria decided to draw a line that made life impossible for people on all the sides. There are no two states you can bring from the southeast now that can match the size of Igbo land in Delta State. In the afternoon, Nigeria will say Emefiele is Igbo. The day Buhari was being asked, "What are you doing with the Igbo?" He said, "I gave Emefiele Central Bank governor. I gave Katibu NNPC. What else should I do for the Igbo?" Then when it suits them, Emefiele and Katibu will be South-South. Junaid Mohammed at the time Jonathan was going to run for second tenure. Junaid Mohammed, on behalf of the Caliphate, said, this Niger Delta, these South South people that are saying their son should have second tenure, have you forgotten that the South South was the creation of the North for managing its interests in Eastern Nigeria? Go and find out, just Google Junaid Mohammed and you see where that was said ahead of 2000 and in the period after 2011, going towards the next round of election. And so what we did, and the people who are doing it, nobody went to do for anybody else. It was the Jaw that were at home involved in the fight with Nigeria that became a part of the process from that part. And they are still in it. Anybody who is not involved in the fight they were doing, anybody who is not involved from the Ogoni, from the Chekiri, from all the sides that are on ground dealing with this matter, will only be discussing what Nigeria put in the atmosphere. The people on ground have taken their trouble to examine all their options, and there's a charter of relationships that will spell out what will happen. And it will be subject to what each of the small and big, everybody will decide for themselves, because that right to self-determination that is agreeable to you is also agreeable to your next small neighbor, whether it's small in Soko or small Ogoni or small in Shekiri, big job, medium or Urobo, all of that. So it is that right to self-determination that in the concept we are advancing that is extended to everybody standing on their father's soil. And that by the time they negotiate what they want that will serve them into the future, it will be the basis of going to say, well, we reject what was there before, and we don't. This is what we want. The ones who were doing the campaign of Biafra, we told them point blank that there's no Biafra, that you can't put a map to any Biafra. You must leave that Biafra by the side. Let it be just standing on the Jaw land, Ogoni standing on Ogoni land, Igbo standing on Igbo land. If Ikwere say they're Ikwere, leave them, because you're not going to take their space. Leave them on their space as long as they're on the table. If Benin say leave them in their space as long as they're on the table. It's everybody's choice, and it will still go to referendum. If there's any unsettled part, it will go to plebiscite. Right. So anybody who is not involved in anybody who doesn't want to bring himself to the reasoning of those on ground who are doing it, for goodness sake, is an Ijoman that is next to the president. The LNC is headed by the Shekiri man today, but is on his way to retirement. The next person that will be president of that Lower Niger Congress is an Ijoman. The charter of relationship that is being prepared for how these things will happen is under the chairmanship of an Ijoman. How can people who are not involved in the process be talking to the process, that are taking so many years by people who have had to carry arms against the Nigerian state in that space? Talking down on it from afar. Anybody who has any question to ask should ask their people who are on that constitutional force majeure proclamation. There are 40 names. There are 40 names of people from that entire flank that. Those from their areas, if you're Ogoni, you will find Ogoni names on that list. Ask them this question. Nobody's conscripting anybody.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Nnadi. Thank you for the answer. Tolani, can you hear me?
Can I ask a follow-up question or no?
No, Mr. Pri, that's we're not going to do a back and forth, because we have other people who have questions for Mr. Nnadi, just to obtain clarification on certain things. If Tolani is not there, then Patrick Weat.
Yeah, thank you. Tony, I think if I get you correctly, you are a strong proponent of boycotting the 2023 elections.
Not boycott. We need to shut down the preparations towards that election, whatever it will take. Because if we head towards that election, we have submitted ourselves to be slaughtered. Political parties that are preparing to go to that election, we are talking about stopping them inside 2021.
Okay. So basically shutting down the 2023 elections, okay.
Yes.
And I'm from the Middle Belt. I think you are aware of the history and composition of the region. So basically, shutting down elections, if those elections...
Where in the Middle Belt are you from?
I'm from Benue, yes.
You are from Benue?
Yes. So basically, shutting down these elections in the Middle Belt would mean that